lives will be more content, more peaceful, and then eventually, again, on the religious track, understand that we can achieve nirvana and liberation, by virtue of that, achieve enlightenment by virtue of that. So these four great efforts, I could say again, this is one way of encapsulating what the Buddha taught as to how to work with our minds. And these first two are what we're going to primarily work with this weekend, is to prevent from arising negative states that have not arisen. Okay, so kind of to be able to keep the negative states of mind that we have the seeds for, if you will, but we haven't yet made them manifest, to kind of keep them from ever appearing. And of course in Buddhism we're not talking about suppressing them. This is not a technique that works. It's just push them down, stuff them down so that they don't manifest at that moment, but instead they just get stronger and stronger. We talk about ways of disallowing them from happening because we remove the causes by way of, by which those will arise. And then the second one that's correlated to this is to let go of the negative states once they have arisen. And of course this is where we do a lot of our work, is kind of when we see these negative habits, these harmful habits coming up, and to kind of address them at that time, to be able to say what is an appropriate way of responding to that, so that I can alter that behavior, alter that thinking, and have a better result from that. Now correlated to this, as I said, is kind of the other side of it. So we've got these negative states we're trying to diminish and keep from arising. On the other side, we have those that we want to embrace and cultivate. These are what we call the positive states. So the other two great efforts are involved in giving rise to the positive states that have not yet arisen. So the places where we haven't cultivated those minds, to strengthen, bring them forward, to allow them to manifest in our lives. Things like, again, compassion and loving kindness and tolerance, patience, wisdom, these kinds of positive qualities. And then to sustain the positive states once they have arisen. So once we brought them into our minds, then we want to make sure we do everything we can to cause them to flourish, to grow, to become a part of our nature. This is all within the understanding that our minds are completely malleable, our minds are changeable. There is nothing about you in terms of the qualities of your mind that is fixed in stone. Everything is workable. Every situation is workable. We talked about this a bit on Thursday night when we were talking about self-compassion and looking at ourselves, to know that our situation is always workable. Even in the midst of our most tormented minds, we still have something we can do. But of course we have to do the practice that helps us to address that. That's why we call these efforts. It does take some effort to practice the Buddhist path. So I was saying how I've been practicing, and I like how some of you said you've been trying to practice. Really at some level, that's what we're all doing, is trying to practice, trying to engage in these teachings as best as we can to address the negative states, to accentuate all those that are positive. So there's a wonderful little parable that comes out of the Cherokee tradition that I'm going to share with you, and some of you may have heard this before, that kind of talks about this idea. So this isn't again, everything I present is Buddhist, but it doesn't mean that Buddhism has a monopoly on any of these ideas. Even in Western psychology, as you're going to see, I'm going to introduce some concepts around Western psychology even as part of this weekend, and some of the research that's being done in these circles of positive psychology. They're seeing that certainly, there hasn't been as much attention on that side of the equation as there is on the negative side. So even in Western psychology, we see some of these similar concepts in cognitive behavioral therapy and so on. But I'm going to share this version of this Cherokee parable of the two wolves with you, and just gives a nice story that we can use around what's going on in our own minds. An old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. "A fight is going on inside me," he said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, self-doubt, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. This same fight," he said, "is going on inside you, and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Well, which wolf will win?" And the old chief simply replied, "The one you feed." So this is the reality that we each have, is like, what are we do, every one of us in the room has a combination of these qualities. Probably every being that exists has a combination of these qualities. Some people have more prevalence on the negative side, have a lot of negative tendencies, harmful habits. Some people have accentuated all these positive states of mind, they've fed that wolf, and by virtue of that they've created much more positive states that are exhibited in their behavior with others as well. So it's up to us which wolf we feed. This is kind of the main thing we're looking at this weekend, is how do we feed the more positive wolf? How do we kind of stop feeding, stop creating the causes and conditions for those negative states of mind? So anyway, I like this little parable of the two wolves, and so I hope you've appreciated some of that idea of how we can actually engage in this. That we ourselves are in charge, that we have to make decisions about what we do in regard to our own minds. It's been interesting, again, as I said, I'll share a little bit from Western psychology, but even Western science, has begun to support a lot of this by investigation into although, again, Buddhism doesn't say that mind is the brain, we nonetheless are seeing in Western science that the brain supports this whole process as well, right? Most of you in the room now have heard of this term of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means that as you change your thinking, your gray matter changes. As you increase more positive tendencies, it actually creates new neural pathways and synapses and so on that are allowing you to go to those positive states more frequently. Whereas we've we've wired our brains to have the more negative tendencies take place, and those synapses and what have you can be dismantled. By creating new ones, new neural pathways, we can let the other ones sort of atrophy and fall away. So they're seeing this in Western science as well. So it's all supported within the understanding that we can change. So I'm just kind of making sure that message gets through, because sometimes it does feel like we don't have much control over our minds, right? We even use this term sometimes in Buddhism, that we're under the control of our delusions, our negative states of mind. But we are, insofar as we don't make a conscious effort to address them. So this is what we're talking about this weekend, is how do we actually do this work. So as part of this, I want to share a little bit of scientific research, or a way of looking at things that I think can actually be quite helpful for us to know about. Although, again, positivity isn't the main gist of what we're looking at this weekend, we're going to see that many of the techniques we use to combat the negative tendencies, the harmful habits, is by supplanting them with positive states of mind. And that's based on the fact that when you have those positive states of mind, the negative states are dismantled. They're not able to arise. So we'll examine this as part of this, but I want to share a bit from a book that I came across through some of the work. I mentioned this course the other night, on Thursday night. Myself and about 9 other people were all trained in July of 2016 in England in a course that's called The Art of Fulfillment. And so we've been trying to facilitate this where we can. It's a bit of a cumbersome course to facilitate. That's a whole other subject. But nonetheless, there's some wonderful content to this course where they did a lot of investigation into what helps us to change our minds, to achieve our potential. The course it's called The Art of Fulfillment. It's about fulfilling our potential as beings to be completely imbued with positive qualities and so on, but in a much more secular context. So a lot of the research that was done, supports the same ideas that we're looking at this weekend. So I wanted to share a bit of what I came across through that. And she's written this, Barbara Fredrickson. Professor Fredrickson is a professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she's done a lot of research into positivity. As I said, positive psychology is a whole growing field for many decades now, but it's fairly recent though, in terms of most of Western psychology came about by looking at neuroses, looking at kind of the problems, the difficulties that people have in terms of their minds, and trying to address it from that vantage point. How do we look at the negative things and try to make someone healthier? as opposed to how do we look at the positive things to try to increase the well-being and health of people from that vantage point, that as we increase the positive, the negative tendencies do diminish. So this is something that Western psychology has been a little late in adapting, but this is really what Buddhism has been dealing with for centuries. Venerable Rabina, who many of you know, she said that we could actually say that the Buddha was the first cognitive psychologist, cognitive therapist, because he's essentially saying, look at what's going on in terms of the content of your own thoughts, and if you change that, you change your life, you change your experience of life, even how you look at the things that happen that are negative in your life. So I want to spend a little time talking about positivity because I think it is really the crux of how we overcome most of our negative states. We're going to talk about other techniques, but the main one that we can say directly counteracts our negative states of mind is when we introduce something that's positive. We introduce a kind of antidotal state of mind that goes completely against that counteracts that negative state. So there's two things I want to talk about. One is what she presents as 6 vital facts about positivity, about maintaining a more positive state of mind. And that even spells out a bit of what I was just talking about. The broaden and build theory is what she's put together, a theory that she's constructed on the basis of this understanding, on what positivity does to us, how it helps us to kind of go in the opposite direction of our negative tendencies. So I hope you'll bear with me in looking at this. Yeah, Ron.
Question, because as a predecessor to this, I often,
Uh-huh.
and I just noted, is the power of negativity, right? It seems that our human consciousness seems to prefer it to some degree, even though we all seek happiness. It seems that we're drawn or caught or stuck or just love to wallow in negativity.
Yeah.
Is there some evidence or something you've discovered, either in Buddhist psychology or in other teachings, that helps?
Well, what Ralph is speaking to, just to make sure it's on the recording, is that this tendency that we do see in ourselves to some degree and in society at large of our honing in on the negative and being much more inclined towards the negative. And is there anything that I've seen in Buddhist or Western psychology that speaks to why that's so? I would say, again, one of the factors we're going to be looking at, and even when we call this harmful habits, habituation is one of the biggest reasons why we tend to go to particular ways of thinking. And it's kind of, your question still might be, well, but then where does that habit come from? Well, when we're dealing with a phenomenon in Buddhism, which is a mind that has no beginning, it's impossible to say that there's any original point that those things came from. Rather, our minds have always been polluted to some degree by negative thinking, by negative thoughts, by a tendency to be more pessimistic, more whatever. It doesn't mean, again, that that's hardwired into our minds. This is a concept we're going to look at, as part of this weekend, as well as the idea of Buddha nature and the fact that within this container of what we call mind are the variety of positive and negative states. Negative states might be the greater share of that for many of us. But as, to use the Cherokee parable, that's the wolf that we feed. That's the wolf that we continually go back to, and that we get even reinforced in our culture to do. I mean, that's why I think the times we're living in are quite interesting, because we have an ability to be influenced by many, many more things by virtue of all the media that we have. If you can imagine India 2,500 years ago when the Buddha was teaching, how much negativity got in terms of cultural influence. It's probably not that much. But nonetheless, there were some. But I think we're living in a day and age where we have many, many more things that cause us to keep those negative states going. We keep buying into them. We keep strengthening them. We keep feeding them. So, in spite of what you're saying, and in spite of what we do see in society at large, in the world at large, the Buddha would say that our fundamental essence is good, is compassionate, is loving, is kind. Not meaning that we have all of those to a full degree within ourselves. We're going to explore this as also within the weekend, is the understanding that those positive states of mind are not just things that feel good and counteract the negative. They are things that can be upheld within truth and within knowledge.
And I just answered my question as you were speaking, in the sense that part of the problem for me is ignorance, and that my expectation is what creates my suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's my own
expectations on the list. We're going to touch on that this weekend too.
Just
So,
comes full circle.
And I like how you pointed out how ignorance is kind of behind all of it, and that this is really the key delusion that we all have to get to. I'm going to invite all of you, you did a little investigation in the meditation before we started. At some point soon I'll invite you to kind of take a look at what causes you thought were behind your negative tendency. You don't have to share all your harmful habits. It's not part of the weekend, is to like bare your soul to me or to the group. That's not what we're going to be doing here. But nonetheless, as we go through this material, I do hope that you can keep relating it back to the things that you feel you'd really like to address through this weekend. Those places and things that you get stuck in, that are your harmful habits that you'd really like to address. Yes, Lisa.
So how does it go back to the consciousness? Because I'm assuming that all these negative traits are back in the consciousness of the mind.
Right.
So what you said earlier, the consciousness dies off, attaches to another form.
The body dies off, the consciousness.
Sorry, the body dies
yeah.
off, the consciousness attaches to another form. So I would think if we're talking generations, millions of generations ago, that the consciousness can still be around. Wouldn't it have been a better consciousness than today?
Well,
without suffering, without all the negativity that we have in our life today?
So your question, Lisa's question was, again, this idea of, is it possible that we would have had some purer, better form of consciousness in the past, given that it goes back without any beginning than what we have here? Well, certainly it's possible that we've done some of this work before in the past, but we didn't do the deepest work to really change our minds fundamentally. It's not to say that the work that we do doesn't matter. It does. The work you all do even just this weekend, in terms of, being able to look at these concepts and start to introduce them into your mind, it's not wasted in any way. But the degree to which it has an impact on not just this life, but future lives, especially many lives down the road, is the degree to which we've actually taken these teachings and been able to change our minds at a much deeper level. We'll talk about this as part of the weekend. This is actually the third difficulty, which is kind of getting to a place where we've completely eliminated those negative tendencies.
Right.
And that's the most challenging work that we do in Buddhism, is to kind of get to that level of undermining them completely. But we have to start. It's kind of like the idea of if you had a huge tree that you wanted to take out, uproot, get it off of your property. It would be really hard to take it in its full form and uproot it at that point, right? Because you got all the branches and all of the leaves and everything else that's there. So how would you uproot it if you didn't make it more manageable?
Right.
So what we're talking about this weekend initially, or the main thing we're going to go into, but we will go into this tomorrow afternoon, is how do we make the tree more manageable? How do we start cutting some of the branches, making, not having quite so much to deal with? Then the uprooting of the tree will come much easier because we've done that deeper work. Well, using the tree analogy is a nice one, because if many lifetimes ago we got some of the branches cut to some degree, but we didn't uproot it, well then the branches are going to grow back. We do have the negative seeds within our minds as well as the positive seeds. And it once more comes down to which ones do we continue to strengthen, which ones do we weaken. It also comes down to, have we done that deeper work to uproot the whole thing?
Right.
And
How does the consciousness decide on which form to go to?
so your question, Lisa, maybe takes us a little off topic, but I'll just say essentially it comes down to karma.
It comes down to
So how does the consciousness decide? I mean, decision isn't involved necessarily. It's a force of karma by which we, take rebirth. We can have more active control over that too, the Buddha says. But the main thing is to attend to eliminating the negative tendencies we have, so we stop creating the karma to have forms that we link to that are more suffering, that don't give us the opportunity we have in this human life. So that gets into a whole field of rebirth and
November, December.
yeah.
Wait a little, like 2 months.
So let's go into a few of these facts. We're going to take a short break in a minute. Since we got 2.5 hours here, I do want to. Why don't we take a break now? Actually, since we're So just take like 10 minutes just to do a little stretch break if you want to get some refreshment or something, and then we'll resume.
When are you still getting the vote on the gas? The girls? 6, 7? 6 in total.
And if we stay till we stay, we'll go.
What I can do is I can get my post-it notes.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea. Yeah.
It'll be easier for me to just have it all. Oh, that's right, Nicole. Yeah, you introduced yourself.
And I did. I went I did some research because it was interesting in the fire code.
Yeah. So welcome.
Thanks
Is this okay so far?
That's okay.
So do you live locally or?
It's that level of admiration, right?
Good. Good to talk to you.
You're so funny. I know. I was telling you that the other day. One of my close friends was telling me that. Why do you say that? Yes.
So let's go ahead and move along into some of these, again, findings that Barbara Fredrickson, again, this professor who's investigated positivity, she's written a book about it. It's not really like a self-help book, it's just really recounting her own findings and sort of the things that she recommends in terms of how to work with positivity. So first of all, she goes into the 6 vital facts about positivity, about these positive states of mind. First of all, that positivity feels good. You know, it kind of gives us good feelings when we think about times where we've been loving and kind and so on. We can see that obviously this induces in us, you know, a more joyous feeling. You know, these actually do have a registration of a more positive feeling tone within us. Secondly, positivity changes how your mind works. That actually you have kind of a different sort of scope or boundary of your mind once you start moving in a more positive direction, that your mind finds different ways of looking at things, trading bad thoughts for good ones, changing the contents of your mind in a sense. So this is something she's found through her research as well. Also, positivity transforms your future. So she says, although good feelings will forever be fleeting over time, positivity literally brings out the best in you. This is something we're going to see when we start talking about this broaden and build theory that she introduces and kind of works with. So these ideas is that, you know, these first 3, that we definitely have some positive benefits, some good benefits from positivity. It also, and this is the one that's really the crux of a lot of what we're doing this weekend, is that positivity puts the brake on negativity. That when you are in a space where you are thinking more positive, where you are having positive thoughts, there's no space for you to have the, you know, unfavorable thoughts arise. That all the negativity is sort of squelched within the space of that. And not in a way of suppressing. Again, Buddhism is never about suppressing, about saying I'm just going to stuff all my negative thinking down into my corner of my mind and hope it goes away. It's actually dealing with the idea that if we are thinking something much more positive in the face of these negative thoughts, that they disappear. They're no longer empowered. But of course, it's something we have to invest in again and again and again. It's training, it's practice. So then the fifth one, positivity obeys a tipping point, and she says the most stunning and practical fact to emerge from the science of positivity is that its effects are non-linear. Meaning that, we're going to be seeing this in the way that the broaden and build theory is demonstrated or modeled, in that we actually have an ability to kind of exponentially increase positive states once we start buying into them. It's not that it's linear, that we get just the same incremental amount the further we go. It's rather that they start creating their own sort of energy in which positivity will be invited in more and more. Then the sixth one, you can increase your positivity. Of course, this is one of the most fundamental facts that we're dealing with in Buddhism. The way the Buddha looks at the mind is that you actually can, through the force of your own habit and buying into those states of mind, having all the thinking that supports those states of mind, you can increase the level of positivity, even in the midst of having a very difficult life. One of the most inspiring things I've read recently, I'm in the middle of or beginning of a book that's by Anthony Ray Hinton, who was an African-American man in Alabama who spent 30 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. He was eventually released, fortunately not killed before, they uncovered the DNA evidence that proved that he wasn't there. There was already good proof why he wasn't there, but nonetheless. And then the other story that I've read recently, I read her biography, her memoir, Dr. Edith Eva Eger, who some of you may have heard of. She was a Hungarian Jewish girl who was taken to the concentration camps, Auschwitz and other camps, at the age of 16, and spent about a year before she was finally rescued. She was lying on a heap of bodies where everyone else was dead. She was practically dead, and she was rescued and brought out of that situation. But essentially, the stories of these people, when you kind of look at the way they live their lives, you see how much positivity played a role in terms of them being able to overcome their situation, to not be completely depressed at their situation. In fact, Dr. Edith Eva Eger, she says that she lived every day with the thought, if I make it through today, tomorrow I will be free. Not to set herself up for the disappointment when she wasn't free the next day, but to give her that optimistic attitude. And so we see that positivity has amazing power within our lives. And by the way, I really recommend her biography, her memoir. It's called The Choice. It's really quite incredible. So just as a footnote, and this is just so you have these were some of the things that we heard even when we talked about the good wolf, right? That good wolf being all of these things, joy, gratitude, and so on. These are the 10 forms of positivity that she hones in on, that she thinks are really important for us to have in our lives. And some of these, again, we'll even see as part of the antidotes to, and by the way, when she uses pride up here, don't think many of you know pride as being one of our delusions that we frequently talk about in Buddhism. And when it is a sort of afflicted pride, yes. By pride here, she means sort of the feeling of accomplishment that we frequently have in regard to ourselves, a bit of more of like self-confidence or high self-esteem on the basis of what we've done. Not a deluded pride where we're thinking we're superior to everyone else. So just know that these are 10 things that she identified and that she works with in her scientific research. And some of the studies she does is essentially try to work with people who already have these patterns and have that group monitor what's happening with them and what they talk about in terms of their ratio of positive things in their life versus negative. And then another group that doesn't have many of these skills and abilities and try to monitor what's going on with them. And it shows these essential facts, that we just went through, those 6 facts about positivity. So these are the things that she tends to focus on. We'll be kind of putting together our own list as we go through this of the positive qualities that offset the negative tendencies we have. All of that research has been put together into a broaden and build theory. So she has 2 concepts around this. That positivity broadens our perspective and our experience, and it has the ability to build, to create greater and greater results on top of what we have experienced already. So the first one is that positivity opens us. This is the broadening idea. The first core truth, she says, about positive emotions is that they open our hearts and minds, making us more receptive and more creative. So this is, when we start having more positive ways of thinking and looking at things in place of the negative, we actually have a much broader sort of, they use the term thought-action repertoire. We have greater things that we are invited to think about, to do in the space of that. Whereas the opposite side of it is that when we are very constricted and in a negative state, we don't have so many options. Our minds feel very, very tight, and we tend to follow more habitual negative patterns because nothing else can get in. It's very compressed. All right? Then the other side of it that it builds is that positivity transforms us for the better. By opening our hearts and minds, positive emotions allow us to discover and build new skills, new ties, new knowledge, and new ways of being. That it actually makes you a fuller being, if you will, more in touch with all the potential that you have. So the way that this is demonstrated, this broaden and build theory, is through a spiral. Now I'm not expecting you to read all of these little things that are on here. This is the positive spiral. It shows that as we open up to these ways of thinking, the spiral becomes larger, meaning that it allows us to broaden our thought-action repertoire. We have many more ways of reacting to things in more constructive veins. We also have an ability to build all of these qualities, to actually build our skills and abilities within the space of that. And so she's identified a number of things that kind of contribute to this as well. I don't need to go into all of these because we will be touching on a few of these.
John, what does it say in the arrow in the middle?
In the middle it says, trait, mindfulness, and positive dispositionality. I'm not going to go into whole explanations of all this. I mostly wanted to give you the idea of the spiral. And so a spiral, sometimes on a spiral notebook, right, it's always the same width all the way through. But here we're talking about a spiral that opens up on the positive side, that allows us to have greater ability to be more responsive to what's going on, to have more adaptability to what's going on, to be able to build skills and abilities that help us to confront whatever it is that we face. Like these people I mentioned, like Dr. Egger when she was dealing with the reality of living in a concentration camp. And one of the things she describes is that they would continually be putting people in lines, and you never knew what line you were in. They'd be like, you go here, you go there, you go here, and one line to the gas chambers, one line back out to the fields to work. I mean, imagine the stress of having that every day, and sometimes multiple times every day. So, we have an ability to adapt to things if we start buying into more positive ways of looking at things, more optimistic ways. On the other hand, this is the negative spiral, and this says trait, mindfulness, and negative dispositionality. If we start spiraling downward, if we kind of feed those more negative states, it becomes tighter and tighter. This is what I was saying, is that you don't have much room to move there. It's not to say that you can't change your mind there, or that you can't do something different there. But when you're down in that very tight spiral, you don't really have a lot of different things to draw from, because you haven't really created the space in which for those to be introduced. Whereas when you broaden the mind with more positive thinking, then you've created different abilities to respond accordingly. So I like this, and I just am introducing it. It's not like a teaching of Buddhism again, but I really appreciate what I've learned in that course in particular around the ways in which we can develop our minds and use positive thinking as a way of counteracting the negative tendencies. And this makes a lot of sense when we apply it to a Buddhist model of the mind, because it feels like that, right? When we are in that negative spiral, when our minds are really quite depressed and anxious and stressful and, whatever, we can see that it doesn't feel like there's much room to move. Like we only have one thought that we can maintain, which is that negative thought. Whereas if we have positive thoughts, we have a lot more to draw from. So I'm going to do a little exercise with you now. Any questions on this, by the way? Not that I can answer a lot of them. If you're really curious about the research that she did and how some of these conclusions, how she came to them, I'd really encourage you to take a look at her book. It's quite good. But no questions? So what I'd like you to do, I know we just had a little break, but go ahead and stand up. And I'm going to do a little exercise with you. And all I want you to do is first kind of extend your hands out this way, so you need a little space there, okay? Now I want, essentially before you do this, what I'm going to have you do is bring your arms together so that your hands interlock, all right? So just do that, okay? Now, look at the way that your hands are interlocked. And can you all see that there's another way that you could interlock your fingers? So now I want you to take your hands apart and bring them back together and do that. You see how uncomfortable it feels? We all have a tendency to go to one particular place, right? Of feeling that it's more comfortable. But we can see... Well, I'm going to put a whole new spin on this. Okay, so that's it. You can have a seat. So actually, that exercise, when I was working for Levi Strauss, I was a corporate person at one point in accounting and finance, believe it or not. And we had like a little leadership training or something, and they did this. And it's just to show that, you know, there are different ways of looking at things. And we do tend to fall into what's most comfortable, right? You know, that we actually, you know, and if we put it together in a different way, it doesn't feel so comfortable. And that's because change sometimes isn't comfortable. So know that this whole process we're introducing you to over this weekend, it isn't that it's going to be instantly feeling like an old worn out shoe that you just can easily slide on. It's going to feel a little difficult at times because we're trying to move in a different direction, kind of moving against the stream, you know, as I mentioned the other night. So anyway, that's just a little introduction to that idea. So I think I'm done talking a little bit about the mind and giving you some context for this. We will go into some of the other teachings that the Buddha gave that give a even broader context for why the work on our minds is needed, touching on the Four Noble Truths and these kinds of teachings. But any questions on the mind or what we mean by mind in Buddhism? Again, we're not in any way in Buddhism denying that our brains or the health of our brains or the body, you know, has no bearing on our mental experience. It actually is interdependent. There's an interdependence going on there. We're simply talking about there is still a primacy of the mind. That mind is the central thing going on. And that, you know, that's really where we're going to do all of our work, of course. Let's go into this next topic that, as I said, we're going to be going through till tomorrow afternoon, which is this idea of train in the three difficulties. So there's a wonderful text, I mentioned this earlier, this tradition that's come to be known as mind training or Lojong. The Tibetan words Lojong, Lo means mind, and Jong has the idea of transforming or training. This is like a whole corpus, a whole genre of teachings that go back to the time of the Buddha, certainly in terms of what the Buddha wrote, especially in the Mahayana scriptures. But they were formulated about 1,000 years ago. There was this wonderful Lama, Lama Atisha, who came to Tibet from India, and he introduced a lot of ways of kind of examining the teachings. I mentioned this a bit on Tuesday night, kind of what's come to be known as the Lam Rim in Tibetan. That means the stages of the path. But essentially, Lojong are like a whole corpus of teachings that Lama Atisha introduced that have to do with the fact that we can train our minds with anything that we meet. We can actually engage in transformative processes, not just, you know, when everything's going well and we're sitting on our cushion, but actually even in the midst of the most difficult things. And of course, when we start working with confronting our negative habits, our negative emotions, it's important to maintain this idea that this is actually the stuff that we need to work on ourselves, you know, to have that kind of perspective. Nonetheless, it's admitted from the very beginning that we have difficulties in doing that this is not the easiest thing. It's a bit like, again, when we put our hands together in a different way. it doesn't feel necessarily so comfortable, and it also is a challenging task, something that we have to invest in again and again. Well, Lama Atisha taught many of these things to his disciples, and his main disciple was Drompa Trungpa, who was this Tibetan master who was a great practitioner of these trainings. Geshe Chikawa came later. He was one of the Kadampa teachers that essentially decided that he needed to share these teachings with a wider audience. These teachings of Lojong were very much kept to a smaller circle of people who he felt, Drompa felt, were really ready for that level of teaching, to do this kind of radical transformation of our problems and our difficulties into a path for happiness. But anyway, Geshe Chikawa decided to share this more openly because he saw that it actually could have greater benefits beyond just those people who had some strength of mind to practice it, that there's many entryways for this. And he wrote what's called the 7-point mind training. And it consists of about 51 different slogans that are all in 7 different parts, 7 points. Well, this one, train in the 3 difficulties, is just one of those 51 slogans. And I'm going to use it as the format for looking at how we work with diminishing our harmful habits, our negative tendencies, so that we begin to have a structure for doing this. Because the 3 difficulties speak to the 3 tasks that we have to do in order to address these. So let me put those 3 difficulties on the board. Most of today we're going to be looking at the first one, believe it or not, identifying the afflictions, because we're not just going to talk about identifying them in terms of what they are. I mean, I think we all know afflictions to some degree, negative habits. When I had you do the reflection before the meditation, and the meditation today before we started, I'm sure things came to mind that are things that you know are disturbing for you, that are patterns that you have, or ways of engaging in the world, or thought processes that you know are difficult, that are challenging for you. So we're going to use the term afflictions for these, and I'll go into some of the synonyms for that a little bit later. The very first stage is to really identify those in terms of knowing what they're all about and knowing where they come from. So that's going to be a good part of today, is to really clearly identify the causes of these afflictions. And there's a whole little process of examining those that we'll go into. The second difficulty that we have to engage in is counteracting them, doing something different in the face of those. I think this is what Pema Chodron even calls these. The first one, actually, just to give you her terminology, I didn't put it on a slide, but maybe I'll insert that before I send this out to everyone. The 3 difficulties, the first difficulty, she says, is seeing neurosis as neurosis. I like her language sometimes, it's a bit more. Seeing, what's going on as a real neurosis, as, this is an unhealthy pattern. And so that is part of the process, but as I said, I want to introduce, in looking at identifying the afflictions, not just seeing them for what they are, but understanding where they come from even. Buddha's really big on the idea of causality, that things arise from causes and conditions. Nothing arises independently. So we have to understand what are the causes and conditions that induce these to arise. That's where we can begin to deconstruct them and remove them. So that's the second step, is how do we counteract them? And we're going to examine a number of techniques to work with them. As I said, I hope that gives you already the instruction on how to practice these teachings. But then finally, the greatest difficulty, the third difficulty, is eliminating them. And by eliminating them, we do mean getting rid of them once and for all. And this is the most crucial difference, I would say, between Buddhist psychology and Western psychology, is that if you went to a Western therapist and you said, I want to never have an angry thought in my head again, I want to never be greedy or jealous, I want to only be compassionate and kind and loving and caring, and the therapist might say, well, that's a pretty tall goal. That might be a bit unrealistic. I can help you control your anger so that it's a level anger that only arises to a degree and is only in certain situations. And I can increase your positive qualities to some degree to where you can have those, but that isn't the expertise of Western psychology. And Western psychology tends to deal more with the neuroses and trying to diminish those through behavioral things and what have you, but not really with the understanding that they can be gotten rid of. Western psychology thinks that there's a healthy level of anger, and there's a healthy level of jealousy, and a healthy level of envy and greed and all these things, I suppose. I am being generalizing. I'm not saying everyone who's a practicing therapist, holds to these views. But nonetheless, this is the wisdom of the Buddha, that the Buddha said from his perspective and his understanding, you can actually do this work. You can actually be completely free of all the negative tendencies and have these positive qualities to a limitless degree. So we're going to look at the logic behind how we can do that, and then what are the main teachings that help us to accomplish that. So this is where we will get into the wisdom of emptiness, which many of you have had teachings on. So let's look at the context for all of this. Kind of where do this whole idea of addressing the afflictions, where does this come from? And especially since we do have some new people in the room, people who don't have as much exposure to these teachings, I think it's useful to go back to the very first teaching that the Buddha gave. He became enlightened at the age of 35, and it said that upon achieving enlightenment, he didn't teach for like 49 days, and then he gave his first teaching. Actually, on Monday, this is what we are remembering and celebrating, the Buddha's first wheel turning, when he actually sat down with the 5 ascetics that he had practiced with. Because his story is that essentially he was a prince, born a prince, and he left the princely life, all of the wealth and good things that afforded, on a spiritual quest. And he studied with many of these great masters, and these 5 ascetics that he practiced with quite extensively. He left them at some point because he felt like that wasn't leading him in the direction of an answer. He sat under the Bodhi tree and achieved enlightenment and came to some deep understanding of the truth of reality. And he encapsulated that in his very first teaching to those 5 disciples, those 5 ascetics he practiced with. And he encapsulated it in form of what are known as the 4 Noble Truths. So again, many of you in the room have teachings on this. It's always good to review them, to remind ourselves of what these 4 Noble Truths are about. By noble, what we mean is we're essentially referring to the word in Sanskrit that's called Arya. Arya, A-R-Y-A. Arya is referring to those beings who have achieved that level of realization. Not maybe all the way to Buddhahood, but at least have come to understand these truths at a very deep level. And so we translate that as noble, but it essentially can have the connotation of superior, noble. These are truths that they say when you achieve that deeper realization, you get them at a level that you haven't had before then. We can all have an intellectual understanding of these, but kind of have them in a much deeper way. So these are set out in terms of 2 pairs. The first 2 are speaking to our situation as it is currently. And the analogy that's frequently used is that the Buddha is like a doctor, and you go to the doctor because something's kind of wrong. Well, many of us don't even realize something's wrong in terms of our overall existence. We'll go into that in a moment. But so the Buddha initially is telling us kind of, okay, this is your situation. This is what you're dealing with. He's going to call it dukkha. Dukkha is a Sanskrit word that essentially is translated as suffering. But it's bigger than the way we think of suffering in our culture. So then the Buddha's going to go into, well, just like a good doctor, if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, I hate to say it, but you've got blah, 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 and you go, oh, why do I have that? What's that all about? Well, they say, oh, you have that because of these various causes, various agents that are behind that. Be they viral or bacterial or whatever the case might be. And in the doctor's case, the Buddha is going to go into all the explanation of why we suffer. Now, when it comes to the last 2 truths, this was the answer to this dilemma. If we are the patient that's diagnosed with this illness, and we come to understand the causes of it, well, then we have to know that there's a state of complete freedom from that illness. There's the ability to be fully cured. Well, to do that, we need to have a medicine. We need to have something that actually helps us to achieve that state of having been cured from our illness. So the 3rd and the 4th speak to what we need to do, here in the 4th, to enact these in our life, to take that medicine, so that we actually can achieve the end of our suffering. So I'm not going to, again, what we're dealing with this weekend is all of this sort of stuff, is kind of what are the paths, what are the consciousnesses, the way of working with our mind that help us to do this work, all the way to the greatest degree, which again will be tomorrow afternoon when we talk about eliminating the afflictions. This is based on the fact that this can actually be attained, which we'll discuss tomorrow afternoon as well. Where we're going to focus initially is understanding these two, particularly the second one, and kind of understanding why we have these agents within us that are causing our illness, why we have the causes of our own dukkha or suffering. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I feel like I do need to give some background. When we talk about suffering or dukkha, as I mentioned, we're not talking about suffering in the coarser way that we frequently refer to. So if I right now were to ask everybody in the room, each of you individually, are you suffering? Well, if you didn't have like a headache or maybe some mental grief or something going on with your body, that maybe even a chronic pain that you might have or something, if you didn't have those things, you might say, no, I'm fine. Maybe we identify suffering as only this coarser form of pain or anguish that people experience. Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg, the Buddha says. This is just the starting point. And it is a place where we can awaken to the reality of pain in our lives or suffering in our lives. But it's not the full extent of what the Buddha means by this term dukkha. That's why defining it as suffering is a little bit of a misnomer. Because in our culture, suffering is just when people are experiencing those difficulties. So most of us would say, no, I'm not suffering now. It's actually kind of fine. I feel pretty good in my body. My mind is pretty content. Things are going okay. So what's to be worried about? So the Buddha says that first type of suffering, you have to go deeper. So there are two more levels of suffering that the Buddha identified when we talk about what are called the three types of dukkha or suffering. And it's important then to delineate what those are. The second one is what we call the suffering of change, or the dukkha of change. This is where the Buddha is actually trying to wake us up to the reality that even those pleasant things that we have in our lives, even those enjoyable experiences, are not in the nature of providing any lasting peace or happiness. They don't really solve the fundamental problem. The Buddha says that where we all are starting from in terms of the premise for this entire set of teachings is that every single being, every one of you wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. And so we think, as long as we avoid those coarser forms of suffering, the ones I just talked about, and what we might call the suffering of pain or the dukkha of pain, as long as we avoid that, then we're fine. And we keep going after all the things that we think bring us happiness. We're starting with a premise that we all desire to be happy and to not suffer, but we go chasing after the wrong things in order to accomplish this. What the Buddha is saying by the second level of suffering, the suffering of change, or the dukkha of change, is that all those pleasant things we go chasing after aren't going to ultimately satisfy you. They don't have the potential to do that. If they could do that, they would have done that. We've had countless lifetimes where we've gone after all those pleasant, wonderful things. And they haven't really produced the change that we're seeking. They haven't made us completely content and happy. And in fact, if we engage in them with the belief that they can sustain that happiness and provide even deeper happiness, they only lead to pain. It's interesting, they use the example of going to the beach, which you guys get to do a lot here, right? So maybe it might be in a little bit cooler time of year, not so hot as it is now, but the analogy is that if you go to the beach, and you might lay out in the sun for a bit, or maybe when you arrive you're already really quite hot, you go in the water and the water feels really good. But then you start to get a bit of a chill, maybe there's a bit of a breeze or something, and you decide, oh, I need to go out and warm up in the sun. And you go out and you lay in the sun and you get really hot, and then you go in the water to cool down. And then you get really cool in the water and you go back in the sun to get warm again. This is what we call having fun at the beach, right? The Buddha is saying that neither of those experiences are really pleasure in the deepest way. They feel like pleasure in contrast to what you were experiencing, because you've changed a factor that allows you to experience the relief, the movement away from the suffering. So when you laid down on the beach initially in the sun, you were starting to experience the suffering of change of the warmth of the sun. It began at that moment, and it kept moving in the direction of suffering until it became unbearable, and you had to get in the water because it's too warm in the sun. And then you dive into the water, and you begin the suffering of being in the water. And it feels really good in contrast to having been out in the heat of the sun, but eventually you get cool and need to get out of the water and get back in the sun. And you end that suffering and you begin the next suffering, which is the suffering of being in the sun again. And this is how all of our lives are essentially. We have the suffering of hunger, and then we have the suffering of eating food. And all of these things, are in the nature of not providing any lasting peace or happiness. If you were to lay out in the sun, all day, however many hours of sunlight, there is in Florida at this point, you would find it, you would be, in pain by the end of the day, right? I mean, you can keep putting on all the sunscreen you want, but it's still not going to feel so pleasant. You can't stay out in the sun that long. Staying in the sun isn't an inherently good thing, or else the more you stayed out in the sun, the better you would feel. So all these experiences that we go to, that we call pleasure, they don't provide the real lasting peace because we have to change the experience to get to something else. And if we were to sustain them, they would actually bring about pain. They actually revert back to that first type of suffering.
Done?
Yes.
No,
Vesna.
I'm sorry.
Yes, that's okay,
But
Vesna.
I'll forget. So, if for me, happiness comes from the actual process of change, changing from the heat, from the pain of the heat on the beach, I go to the water, I'm happy. Then, okay, that happiness kind of goes
Right.
away, but I have the option, I change again, come to the sun, I'm happy again. So I find happiness in changing types of suffering. It feels like happiness, but it feels
Right.
really like happiness. What's wrong there? And my whole life is like that, so I can say, yes, oscillating between suffering and happiness gives me happiness. It's not always, but, it's sometimes. Yes, I would like it always, but it's not so much wrong with sometimes either, in my particular situation.
I understand. And I think that all of us to a degree buy into this, especially in the West, where we've gotten really, really good at coming up with enough things to keep us feeling like we're happy.
Yes.
It's not that hard. We've got lots of sensory stuff. I think Lama Yeshe, when he came to the West, this was, over 30 years ago, he called it super samsara. Samsara is the term we refer to of this conditioned existence. It's like we've taken it to a whole new level because we have the ability to delude ourselves into thinking that we're actually quite happy. I mentioned the other night, I think, did I mention this here? I'm always, like I said, getting confused when I've been on the road when I first sat down with my brother one time to try to explain some teachings of the Buddha because he kept bugging me for something. I tried to explain this truth of suffering, and he couldn't get it because in his mind he was happy, even though he just complained about his job and complained about all this stuff. He didn't really see that he was fundamentally suffering. And I think that we become somewhat blind to our situation by buying into that idea. First of all, because we don't see the conditionality of that. If you don't have the conditions in place to be able to maintain that, then it's obvious that it's not a satisfactory way of trying to be happy.
Right.
In the West, like I said, we've gotten really good at it because we have the means to do that. Most of us. I'm not saying everybody is, completely well off. We have a lot of people in this country who are still in need of just some fundamental stuff in their lives to provide some measure of comfort and stability. But for many people in the world, we continually are filling that gap, filling that hole with the next thing, and we don't ever look at the hole that's underneath all of that desire to find some fulfillment that is never really found, but is rather a continuous process of relying upon the next thing, relying upon the next thing. That conditionality speaks to it being unsatisfactory right there. Because it's only capable of being sustained when the conditions are there for that.
Right.
If the country were to change drastically, and things do change pretty quickly sometimes in the world, and all of a sudden we're in a war-torn country, where it's impossible to get all the goods that we want from, that normally satisfy our appetites and our tastes. Yeah, imagine, and many people in this world are living in war-torn countries right now where they can't even get food that they like. They just get food that will help them to sustain their bodies well enough if they can even get that. So I think this is a delusion that we can buy into really easily. and think that somehow there's nothing wrong with it as long as we keep doing that. And the other side of it is, no matter how much you do that, you still are not going to be able to stave off certain levels of reality, which is that you are eventually going to age to a degree where old age will become problematic, illness can become a problem, death is at the end of the line for every one of us. We can't do anything to avoid those sorts of sufferings. You can't say, oh, I'm not going to die today, when death is actually happening, and I'd rather, enjoy my time out at the restaurant or something. No, you're going to have to face death at that moment. So it doesn't solve all of our problems either. It doesn't solve the deeper dissatisfactions that we have. So I think there's some, we can analyze it and say that definitely it's not a solution.
Right.
So,
So then,
yes,
here's a
Tracy.
question then. So do you stay in your situation, your suffering, whatever your suffering is?
Uh-huh.
So you stay in your suffering so you can then overcome and force your mind into this positive state, or?
So this is what we'll be talking about, Tracy, over this weekend, is kind of dealing with situations to some degree, but your question of do we stay in the suffering in order to work with, we just recognize, this first truth is about recognizing that this is what we're dealing with. And it's not that we have a choice to stay or to, we can eventually, through this deeper work, get completely free of this conditionality. But the bigger question is, how do we use what we're facing in terms of having, first of all, the wisdom that understands it for what it is, and then secondly, doing what we can to uproot the causes of all of that. So that's why the first truth is taught at the beginning, is because we have to get that it's not satisfactory. So the first one we get that's not satisfactory right away, suffering of pain, no problem. When I'm feeling pain or mental anguish, sure, I want to be free of it, not a problem. But the second one, I can get quite caught up in and think, that's not a problem. It's great to have all these wonderful things in my life. It's great to be living the high life, whatever. Well, no, it isn't. It doesn't ultimately satisfy. It doesn't ultimately get rid of what your fundamental problem is. And that's because of the third one that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So the first step is to understand it as suffering, to see it as suffering. So that then whatever we're experiencing, it's a reminder that our situation isn't so hot. It isn't okay. Right? I think I said this the other night, that book, I'm okay, you're okay, it actually should be, I'm not okay, you're not okay, everyone's not okay. Because as long as we're in this state of what we call again samsara, this conditioned existence, even the most pleasurable things we experience don't ultimately satisfy. Now, I'm not denying that they produce pleasure. They produce pleasure, but it's a relative pleasure. It's not a lasting, sustainable pleasure. And any suffering we have in our lives can also be a doorway through which we can learn and, investigate and work with our minds, not to create the same tendencies that got us into that situation, which is what we're addressing this weekend. Yeah. Does that help someone?
So, we're talking about maybe the state of your mind versus the conditions. When I say stay, I'm thinking stay in the conditions, but perhaps for me to get it is stay in the mental state of mind. That's two different things. So,
Say that again. I'm not.
I didn't ask the question. I'm trying to clear it up. So there's suffering, but
Right.
it's the conditions that are causing the suffering. No, it's not the conditions. It's my mental state that's causing the suffering. Correct?
Well, I'd say your mental state in the moment can exacerbate the suffering and create the causes of future suffering, but it is definitely the causes and conditions that have ripened into that suffering that you're experiencing in the moment. You always have kind of two tracks going on. You have your present mind that is making the decision about how to respond or react to the suffering you're experiencing, and that suffering you're experiencing is ripening from what you did in the past.
Right.
And so you have all of that coming into play in the moment, and if you continue to buy into, again, with a faulty understanding of what that experience is, that's why, again, the first truth is taught. If you don't really understand it for what it is, and you react in familiar, habitual ways that are the same ways that got you into that in the first place, then you're just going to keep going back to the same place, keep having the same experience. Whereas, if you have some awareness at that point, and you decide that you can respond differently because you understand what this is about, and you know that the patterns that got you into that were faulty, then you can do something different. But it takes all that awareness, all that knowledge. This is why, again, my brother was the example I used earlier, but we could say many, many people in this world can't even see this first truth. They can't even see that what they're involved in is an unsatisfactory situation. Or maybe it's that they just don't want to face up to that or hold that thought. I know some people look at Buddhism and think it's kind of a depressing place to be because it's just all suffering, you know. Well, it is all suffering. But that's not all the Buddha taught. If the Buddha stopped here and said, you know, guess what, you're all suffering and there's some causes to it, I hope that works out for you. I hope you figure out how to get out of this. You know, kind of left us to our own devices. Well, then it wouldn't have been very hopeful. Then I'd say, yes, we're dealing with a very pessimistic philosophy of life. Just kind of rubbing our nose in it and saying, you know, I don't really want to see that closer, thank you very much. But he said you have to see this closely to get that there's something else could be there, because you have to really understand the full dimensions of the unsatisfactory nature of our existence. You know, just think about the reality of death, that at death, everything you've experienced in this life in terms of all the fleeting pleasures and all these wonderful, delightful things you've done, everything on your bucket list, you know, trips to countries or whatever it is, you know, I don't know, people really have these bucket lists. I've never created one. Maybe it's a spiritual bucket list, you know, but all of these kinds of things, they're gone in an instant. It's not like you can take all the wonderful memories and all that with you. I mean, that is implanted on your mind, but no doubt, they were probably the source of more delusion for you because you get really attached to all those things. You really wanted to continue to experience all those things, and now you have to be separated from them. So at the moment of death, it becomes pretty evident that a lot of the stuff we engaged in really wasn't that beneficial. But people still go to people's funerals, and you often hear, oh, they lived a really good life, they did a lot of travel, they were very successful. I mean, all these kinds of worldly ways of measuring the quality of a life. But the quality of a life in Buddhist terms is, to what extent have you moved in this direction to address our fundamental problem?
Can you use an example? Pick a suffering. Use an example and go through the 4 steps.
Okay.
Well, unless you're going to do that later on.
Well, maybe I'll go through the 3 types of suffering, and let me finish that, and then we'll try to work with examples on this. So everyone's clear about the second type then, right? What we call suffering of change. It's not an easy one to kind of get our heads around, but it's the fact that every one of those pleasant things that we've experienced didn't really satisfy in the way that we're seeking. I sometimes use the example, Venerable Rabin always likes chocolate cake, right? So if I were, and I apologize, I didn't bring in a chocolate cake, but if I were to bring in a chocolate cake, and I offered each of you a piece, and you all were able to tell me, no thank you, I had chocolate cake once, and I'm still experiencing happiness from that. You know, you're already content. I don't need to give you another piece of chocolate cake. But we know that's not the case, right? I mean, how many times have you had chocolate cake in your life? Or if you don't like chocolate cake, fill in the blank, you know, carrot cake, lemon cake, whatever cake. Pie, if you like pie. We know we keep going back to those things. Why? Because they're not ultimately satisfying. They don't. And recall when you were young and you went to your first birthday party and there was all these cupcakes or pieces of cake and you just started eating piece after piece thinking, oh, this is great stuff, this is going to make me really happy. And then after the 4th or 5th piece, you're like, you know, you don't feel so good. So those 2 things are pointing to the fact that it doesn't ultimately satisfy, it doesn't do the trick. In the moment it makes us feel good, but there's no final relief. And secondly, if you were to sustain it, it doesn't induce further happiness, it actually eventually becomes pain. So that just points to the fact that their inherent nature isn't there to produce happiness. That's why, again, Buddhism is really all about finding the sources of happiness within ourselves. Then you can have your piece of cake and you can do whatever, but you don't put all the onus on those things to induce happiness. You find that there's a deeper level of contentment and well-being that can be experienced. And that comes about at its deepest level when we do this work down here. Yes?
Sorry, Doc. So
Sure,
what is the promise in terms of true, lasting, everlasting happiness? Not everything, nothing lasts
Right.
forever, but what is Buddhism promising us? Not promising us if we
Right.
follow the path. What is the goal? Where do we arrive?
Sure,
How
sure.
it feels there, and is there
Yeah.
suffering? I mean, there shouldn't be suffering, but.
No.
But
There
what
is.
is it that we're going towards?
Absolutely. I mean, and when we talk about this goal of the true cessation of suffering and its causes, we're essentially talking about the state of nirvana. Nirvana is, for the individual, a state where you've removed all these causes to where you're no longer afflicted in any way. And you experience, again, I can't speak to it out of personal experience because I don't know what that's like. But they say there's a peacefulness in the mind because you're no longer conditioned in this way. And that's really speaking to this third level of suffering, what we call pervasive conditioned suffering. It's the fact that what is our fundamental problem, the subtlest way that we have to understand dukkha, this dissatisfactory state we're in, is that we're under the control of factors, our own karma, our actions, and our delusions, our afflictions, what we're looking at this weekend. These are the things that are controlling us to cause us to have unsatisfactory experiences. So as long as we're under the control of those, we're in dukkha. We're essentially dealing with an unsatisfactory state. Now when you remove those causes of suffering, what do you experience? You don't experience a conditioned happiness. You experience a state of well-being that is no longer conditioned in that way. It will experience peace, contentment, maybe we could even call it bliss or joy, eternally. You will be in that unchanging state because you're no longer conditioned to experience the kind of contrasting things. You're sort of free of all of that. So it's hard to explain it in terms of our conventional way of looking at happiness and pain and how we have pleasure and pain and kind of following those. They say if you develop your mind fully, go beyond your own nirvana to the state of Buddhahood, a Buddha's abiding in a blissful state that's kind of unparalleled. And anything that they're experiencing is inducing this blissful feeling. There's no longer any contrasting experiences of pain and pleasure in the way that we have them, as just kind of being relational.
Thank you.
So it's hard to explain beyond that because obviously we don't know that yet. So Buddha's promise is that you can attain these deeper states of peace. Now it's not to say that we don't have some reflection of that in our own experience. I would say many of you in the room who've been practicing Buddhism know what it's like through meditation or through other practices to arrive at a place where you do feel somewhat peaceful because you've temporarily disarmed some of that conditionality. But until you do the deeper work to disarm it, you're still going to be experiencing some level of dissatisfaction. So this third level of dukkha, and it's called pervasive conditioned or compounded suffering. Rinpoche likes this term. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, he likes compounded, because compounded, it's like compounded interest, right? You keep putting things on top of it. The idea is like, this is telling us that we're all in prison, and while we're in prison, we're creating the causes for more time in prison. So it's like we keep just extending our stay in prison, compounding upon all of it. And that's because we are conditioned. We're conditioned by the causes of our suffering, the next truth, which are delineated as karma and delusions. The Buddha says that all the problems, why we're experiencing these three levels of suffering, the suffering of pain, the suffering of change, this pervasive conditioned suffering, why we're in that state is because of causes. It's not like it's happening randomly, that there's some, something that's at foot that we aren't involved in. We created the causes for that. How do we create the causes for that? At the most fundamental level through our delusions, our afflictions, our distorted states of mind. And how that manifests is that we create actions on the basis of that. Our minds create mental movements, thoughts, conceptions. On the basis of that, we say things, we do things in the world. All of that is karma. All of that is this force or this energy that we create that is the most direct cause of our experiences. But it's all coming from our minds. Hence even the first topic that I mentioned, the primacy of the mind, that the mind is the workshop. So, one more analogy just to help clarify what we mean by the truth of suffering. These three levels, this dukkha. The three levels of dukkha, Lama Tsongkhapa in his great treatise, he exemplifies these by talking about how you have, let's say you have a wound, like a really tender wound that could be like a blister or broken skin or something. You know that if you were to brush that up against something that's abrasive, you'd feel pain, right? Imagine that happening. You know, that's the first type of suffering. Very easy to say that's suffering. The second thing is, that even in the midst of that painful experience of it being abraded, imagine now taking a very cool salve and putting it on it. That's kind of relieving the pain for the moment. It allows you to have a diminishment of that pain, and it feels quite pleasant, actually. That's the second type of suffering. It's a suffering of change. It's like we put the salve of these positive or these pleasant experiences on top of our painful experiences or our empty experiences, the kind of hole that we're always, experiencing at the depth of our being, wanting something to give us that satisfaction. That feels like that. Well, the third level of suffering is the fact that we have the wound. It's the fact that we have this fundamentally wrong, what's the right word for it? Something that is not right. It's not the way that things should be. We have this wound that is our very woundedness that is speaking to, again, our being conditioned by the causes of suffering. That's our fundamental state. We could say that that's 24/7 suffering. We have the wound all the time. It's getting abraded and we're experiencing pain, or we're relieving it at times by having these pleasant experiences. But you never get rid of the wound until you do the deeper work. So this is a way of explaining these. As I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about these two until tomorrow afternoon in terms of the deeper level of work we do have for an end of suffering. But everything we're talking about this weekend is encompassed within the path. I mean, how do we actually move in that direction? As I said, you can't flip a switch. You can't say, okay, this is my situation up here, samsara. I'm in conditioned existence. I'm experiencing dukkha. And I'm just going to flip a switch and now I'll have nirvana. I'm fine now. Thank you very much. I mean, if we all had little switches in us that we could do that, we'd have done it already, I'm sure. It does take effort. This goes back to what I said earlier, these great efforts we have to make to address the negative states of mind that are the causes of our suffering and induce the positive states of mind, the correct thinking, all of that supports our path to liberation, to enlightenment. So any final questions on this schema for looking at things? It's really quite ingenious. I mean, the more you reflect on the Four Noble Truths, the more that you can see the reality of this. As I said, you won't see it at the deepest level of reality till you become an Arya, a noble being, till you have that direct realization that can occur for every one of us through dedicated practice and meditation. Does this make some sense? Especially those of you who are new to Buddhism. Okay.
I liked that wound example. I think
is really good.
Clarified for me.
Okay.
What I was talking, the
Right.
experience on the beach. That's especially when one has a burn wound.
Yeah.
It really hurts and burns. And then when you put the cold dressing, it's true relief. But it doesn't last very quickly, as the dressing warms up and the pain comes back. You have to keep on changing the dressing, and it's
Yeah, right.
just can go on forever. It's an excellent example.
Yeah. And if you could imagine having that wound forever,
Burn,
then this is what we're dealing
Like a
with.
hell experience, right?
We're just continually having those things that interfere with our peace, and we think, that's the painful part of it, the abrasion, and then we have the relief to the abrasion when we put on something nice and soothing and enjoy the delights of samsara. On Tuesday night we talked about renunciation, and renunciation is essentially, when we come to really turn away, not just from that abrading kind of experience, but even from the soothing experiences. We see them for what they are, and we recognize that we have to do the deeper work to get rid of the wound. Because as long as we're wounded, we're going to continue to go through that cycle of the pain, the pleasure, the pain, the pleasure. Yeah,
If suffering comes from my karma,
uh-huh.
with the path I change it. I change my karma.
Sure,
Yes.
absolutely. So and this is like the mechanism by which we actually make a change in our experience all the way to nirvana or all the way to enlightenment, is that by being meticulous in tending to our minds, we then change our karma. Then our karma results in different experiences. Now, of course, along with this, and I won't be talking about this as much this weekend, we have to address the unskillful karma that we've created in the past, and that's why purification is emphasized in this tradition, is that we have planted a lot of seeds that, if we've had countless lifetimes, we can't even imagine all the karma we've created. Some good, some bad, some that will result in happiness, some that will result in suffering, but none of it really is going to get ultimately satisfied. But nonetheless, the beginning stage is I have to tend to that process. Be meticulous in what I do now so that I create more good seeds and less bad seeds, and purify the bad seeds I've created so that they don't ripen into unfavorable experiences. Not because I think that that's the solution to the whole problem, but it is a beginning. It's a place where we can start from. It's a place where I can say, okay, at least I have a good rebirth, a good human life with good qualities, so that I can use this life meaningfully and purposefully, and actually have the leisure and the fortune to be able to work on my mind. Whereas if we don't do that work, then we get to the end of this life and all we've done has been very hedonistic and enjoy all these things in life. We've created more attachment, more whatever. We could very easily be born into a state of an animal, and then as an animal, what can you do? If a dog were here in the room with us, that dog would just be sleeping right now, probably. I mean, everything I'm saying might be hitting it at a very subtle level in terms of its words that are coming in. It doesn't really have an ability to understand those words, most of those words. It doesn't have an ability to think about those words, to meditate on those words like we all have. So we have to first tend to all of that process. Stop creating the actions that cause us to have the grosser forms of suffering. Try to at least have more pleasant experiences in samsara, but then do the deeper work to remove the delusions that are the cause of us being in samsara in the first place, of us having the wound. Because admittedly, the salve on top of the wound feels better than the abrading of the wound. And there's no denying that. There's a contrast there between those two. We're just not talking about them as being an absolute end. Continuing to put the salve on, continuing to have a good human rebirth, continuing to have all these pleasures of samsara, that isn't the solution, because you still got the wound. So does that help somewhat? Okay. Just have a few more minutes before we have our break, and then we'll spend the afternoon going into these difficulties in more detail, particularly that first one. So this is what I mentioned already, but I'll just reiterate. While karma and delusions, or afflictions, these are interchangeable words, are both cited as the causes of our suffering, the delusions in our minds are the root cause, particularly ignorance. So that'll be the work we do tomorrow afternoon in particular, is looking at that ignorance that is what needs to be uprooted completely in order for us to stop our negative states of mind, our harmful habits. But nonetheless, we can do work prior to that. As I said, just like the tree, we need to manage the tree, get the branches cut back before we can uproot the whole thing. So these afflicted states of mind, these delusions arise from their own causes and conditions. They are the primary cause of your suffering. But everything that is caused also has, everything that is a cause also has its own causes. There's always causes behind anything we consider to be a cause. So every cause is an effect, every effect is a cause. Because it's a continual process of causation. This is what we see in our world, right? That the physical world is all about causes and conditions. So this is an understanding we have in Buddhism, is that the afflictions themselves are arising from causes. So this is why one of the steps I want to look at in this first thing, which is identifying the afflictions, this is the first of the three difficulties, is to identify, first of all, what we call the three root afflictions. Ignorance is going to be one of them. As I said, I'll touch on that a little bit today, but mostly tomorrow afternoon. We have to really understand why they're called root, is because everything else we have that distorts our mind, whether it be jealousy or greed or I don't know what other, these spite or these sorts of things, or even like other harmful habits that we have in terms of our speaking or our physical actions. They're all arising in tandem with these three root afflictions, sometimes even a combination of them. fear even, is one that is not on the three root afflictions, but it could say, we could track it into how it is arising on the basis of those. So everything that you've thought of already, when we did the meditation this morning and we said, what's kind of my primary harmful habit, something I'd really like to be rid of. If it's a harmful habit, if it's something that is coming, that induces more suffering for ourselves and others, it's rooted in these three. Secondly, I want to introduce what's called the 6 causes of the afflictions, and this is what we'll spend most of this afternoon looking at. So let's go ahead and just do an introduction to some of these, at least begin this process. We can revisit this in the afternoon if we need to. The 3 root afflictions, the very first one is attachment or desire. And this is a big word in Buddhism, right? Attachment. Attachment in our everyday language, like if you talk about how you have an attachment to your children, for example, or to your pets, well, some of that embodies some good feeling about them, right? Because you do care about them. You do want them to be well. You do want them to succeed in life. You do want them to have good things and so on. So there is some part of that that is fine, and we're not denying that. Where it becomes diluted, and where even in these situations where we talk about having attachment for one's children and so on, is that we can sometimes overlay a lot of stuff. We can exaggerate some of it so that we have a tendency to have some bias in regard to that person. So this is described, and I'm giving you a very technical definition here. This comes from what's called Lorik, which is the study of minds and awarenesses. This is how it's described there, and I'm going to use the technical language that Geshe Rabten uses in his book, Mind and Its Functions, and then I'm going to talk about it in just regular lay terms because it's important that we see this one. This one is, when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, in the very first sutra, he actually started with saying, this is the cause of our suffering. Why? Because it's the most operative way that we're, kind of our default mode that we're on every day. And of course we can see how the other 2 root afflictions play into that as well. It's described as a distinct mental factor, meaning a component in our minds, a function in our minds that, when referring to a contaminated phenomenon, over-exaggerates its attractiveness and then proceeds to wish for and take a strong interest in it. So it already gives a flavor of it in terms of this more technical language, but it's essentially saying that anytime we experience something that produces an attractive feeling, a pleasurable feeling, kind of that stuff we were talking about that's part of the second suffering, right? The suffering of change. Anytime something pleasant comes into our lives, what we do in this mind of attachment when it's operative is that and it's called contaminated phenomenon because it's essentially something that is created through the force of our delusions. This object, such as that chocolate cake, for example, that piece of chocolate cake, this mind over-exaggerates the positive qualities that are there. By over-exaggerating, we mean that it kind of coats the entire thing with nothing but pleasantness. It only sees the pleasant aspects of it, only sees the delicious aspects of it. It doesn't see anything that is unfavorable about it. Moreover, it has a wish for it and takes a strong interest in it, and in fact, grasping at it and not wanting to let it go. I mean, look at our own minds. If I did have that chocolate cake for all of you. I don't know, is there chocolate cake at lunch break? Sorry. I'll have to bring one
There's
tomorrow.
carrot cake and
Carrot.
red velvet cake.
Oh, wow. Okay. That may be, better for some, maybe not for all. But what it does is it doesn't want to be separated from that to the point where even in the midst of eating it, we're constantly anticipating what the next bite's going to be like, right? You kind of shove one forkful in your mouth and you're chewing it and you're already getting the other forkful ready. It's like a conveyor system or something. We rarely even experience the pleasure that we have from that because we're so much caught up in anticipating what the next moment's going to be like. And how disappointing it is when you get to the end and you're scraping all the frosting off the plate and licking it. You're doing all these things to try to keep that experience going, right? It is actually, one of the things they say is if you engage in any of these pleasurable experiences and you don't have a mind of attachment, you actually experience more pleasure. Because we become frequently even blind to the pleasure because we're constantly chasing after the next moment of it, the next moment of it, and not being present with that individual moment of it. So this is the way that attachment works. And of course, attachment causes us to not only overlay this pleasantness, but we also exaggerate a lot of other things about it. Not the least of which is that it has some ability to give us some lasting pleasure. We hold that while we are engaging in those things with the mind of attachment. We think that it is the be-all and end-all of that experience. Oh, how wonderful, I get to experience that, and we just keep craving it and craving more of the same. Wanting to have continual experiences like that, to what Vesna's speaking about, Always running after that. Attachment is our default mode, as I said. This is what we start with every day, is like we're just vampires, like waiting for the next feast, Or as Venerable Rabina says, we're like junkies born into a world of junk. We have a junkie mentality that's just like looking for our next fix. And we just keep getting it here and getting it there, but once more, it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. But attachment is the force, the deluded force through which we keep investing in that. And we keep, through the force of repeatedly doing it, as we're going to see, because we talked about, in answer to your question, Lisa, earlier, we get habituated. No, that was your question. Right, Ralph, about why do we have those negative tendencies? Because we become habituated to those. Why do we have attachment? Because we become really habituated to attachment. It is quite a default mode that we operate from. Is always looking for the next fix. And putting all the onus on that. And then it doesn't quite satisfy, so then we get the next fix, and then we get the next fix. But that's what's driving us. It's not to say, again, the Buddha doesn't deny that we have to feed these bodies and we have to take care of these bodies. The Buddha is saying, what are you doing with your mind when you're doing that? And sure, you're going to eat pleasant food. Who wants to eat unpleasant food? None of us in the room are going to sit down and eat like all the stuff we can't stand. That's not. But the Buddha is saying, what's going on with your mind when you're doing that? While you're putting that food in your mouth, and this is a good exercise for lunch now that's coming up. While you're eating something that tastes really good, are you able to stop the mind from going to that place of continually craving the next moment, to just being present with the pleasantness of it, understanding that it's not going to ultimately satisfy you? That's already a huge step. That's one way of kind of blocking some of those thoughts of attachment of arising initially. But we'll talk more about attachment, and we'll go on to the other two delusions that are kind of at the root of all this this afternoon. I think we're at lunchtime then. Any final questions or comments before we take our lunch break? So the questions have been really good. Thank you for asking them, because a lot of times I realize that a lot of times the questions help to bring out points that I should have said that I am glossing over or missing. So please, do take the time to investigate these teachings with your own questions. There are no bad questions, okay? Only questions that help to elucidate. So all of your questions will do that, so please ask them when you get a chance to. So let's go ahead and just do a short little prayer. If you have the prayer book there, we're going to go to page 235. And we're just going to recite this first prayer on that page. We weren't going to do, by the way, for the remaining session today, we won't do quite as many prayers at the beginning even. We didn't do that much, but we'll do just kind of a shorter way of setting our motivation. But for this, on page 235, it's always good at the end of any of these kinds of activities we've engaged in with this wholesome thought of trying to make this of great benefit to ourselves and others, that we dedicate or seal that positive energy, because we've created karma. We talked about karma this morning. Karma is what's been happening in your mind. You've been creating karma every single moment that you were here these last 2.5 hours. So now we want to make sure that all those positive thoughts, all that positive energy gets dedicated to the best result of ourselves achieving enlightenment and then being able to help others to do the same. So just recite this first verse in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Sorry, I read the second verse too because I'm a creature of habit. Anyway, so we'll have lunch? Do you need some help with people setting things up and all?
Oh,
that?
yes, I just want to say thank you, Don, for this morning. That was wonderful, and thank you all for coming today. And so, just to make things a little easier, we did want to provide you all provide you with lunch. So if, we'll just need a few hands, maybe 2 or 3 more to help in the kitchen, if you already went, getting everything out. And just wanted to let you know, we have a green salad, a pesto pasta salad. Tracy brought some sushi, everything's vegetarian. And then we're gonna make some little sandwiches. So we have some whole wheat bread, and I made a goat cheese and creamy spread. So you can do that with some roasted red pepper, artichokes, some portobello mushrooms, and spinach. So we just ask that you help yourselves to that. Everything will be out on the table, but I just want to let everybody know what we have, okay? So thank you all so much. And then if we can also have a few hands helping to clean up, just to make it easier. So thank you so much and enjoy, and we'll gather, and then maybe Don will bless the food for us in a few minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All the technology going there. So there we're connected now. You just keep it close to my mouth is the problem.
And Bearable tend to find that when it cuts in and out,
It's something with
recorded.
this.
Yes.
Okay. So let's just generate our motivation again. We're just not going to do a full meditation, but just take a moment to think about why you're here. Again, ideally, we start with recognizing that each of us wants to work on our own minds because we know that we'll be happier if we do so. We'll have less of these harmful habits. We won't feel so controlled by them. But we also want to engage in these teachings, as I said this morning, because we want to be of greater benefit to others. We want to help them to tame their minds. By working on ourselves, we can then better help others. So kind of have that dual intention, being here both for yourself and your own self-development, but also so that you can help others to find the peace and happiness that they seek. Good. All right. So if you don't mind, Ingrid, I'm going to answer your question now as best as I can.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
So Ingrid brought up the point, when we talk about our consciousness potentially ending up in an animal state, and that animals have consciousness, and it does sometimes bring up the question then, well, if you're an animal and you don't have so much awareness of your mind and what to do with your mind and to make decisions like we can in our human life, that's why this human life is so ideal, is because we can know our minds and decide we're going to refrain from killing and stealing and all these things, that we're going to actually develop greater qualities. Well, animals don't have that potential, so how do they ever get out of their animal rebirths if they're continually creating only patterns that are not so helpful, patterns that actually will cause them to continue to have that? And there's 2 points. One is, this is one reason why we want to avoid those kinds of states ourselves, is because we recognize that if we were to be reborn as a worm or something in our next life, we wouldn't have that opportunity. And as a worm, you may not engage in a whole lot of negative actions. Worms don't go around killing other animals or anything, but you still are under the control of ignorance at a deeper level when you're born with a worm mind and a worm body, and what have you. But there are always within if we take any being right now, say there's a being that is in the animal realm at this time, that's where their existence is. It doesn't mean that they've always been animals. It means that karma ripened at the end of the previous life and drove them into that existence. But a good karma could ripen at the end of that worm life that will cause them to have a good rebirth. And so we all have the combination of these things because we've all been around since beginningless time. So we've all engaged in wholesome, healthy actions. We've engaged in unskillful, unwholesome actions. So we've planted both negative and positive seeds, and at the end of any one life, they say that only one seed ripens that drives you into your next rebirth. So we have lots of them that haven't ripened in terms of providing a rebirth. Not every karma gives us the potential for a rebirth, but those that have are both negative and positive. But they do say that if we get reborn in these lower realms, it can be a while before we get out, because we don't have the potential to engage in a lot of skillful actions. Does it make sense in that regard? I don't know if that helped completely, but so an animal can't become that aware. Now we do have exceptions. I mean, I was really sad to hear about Coco the gorilla. Do you know Coco the gorilla, that sign language? Coco was actually able to discern some things and certainly exhibit emotions and an ability to understand, things that humans would consider to be more in their domain. But most animals just don't really have that capacity, and they just lack that. And so it's really understandable that we want to avoid that state, and that if we were to end up in that state, the chances are we would engage in a lot more negative karma. But yeah, what were you going to say, Tracy?
So this is the first time I'm hearing this though. We only have one seed that's ripening and alive?
No, the one seed
Or the
that
one-
takes
one-
you into that rebirth,
Okay.
in
so-
terms of determining what you're going to be.
So you have multiple karmic situations going down in one life.
Well, and even what fills out that life is we're going to end up being a weekend on karma, I can tell. They have two different types of karma that kind of determine your life. The very first one is a single seed that is your projecting karma, or propelling karma. It's the karma that ripens at the end of a life, and will ripen at the end of this life, that propels you into your next existence. So that's the one that determines, okay, you're going to be reborn as a human, a female, like this kind of like all of that. It's just saying essentially kind of the raw stuff of your human existence. But then, whether you're born to a wealthy family, to a family in poverty, to with a very healthy body or a body that's sickly, whether you're born in an environment that's hostile or an environment that's really quite nurturing, all of those sorts of things come from your finishing karma. Your finishing karma or completing karma kind of fills in the picture of your rebirth. So there's many karmic seeds involved in the whole rebirth, but the one karma that ripens at the end of that life that says, oh, you're going to be an animal, oh, you're going to be, a human, you're going to be whatever. That karma is of a single nature. Because we can't have two ripening or we'd end up in two different existences. So there's only one that takes us into that particular existence, but then what that existence looks like is painted by all the other karmic seeds that we've created. So the Buddha says that essentially nothing that we experience is outside of our karma. It's all karmically determined, but it's not karmically fixed because it's dependent upon other causes and conditions, and it's also something that can be changed. Through purification, we can purify the negative karmas. Through, doing more and more virtuous deeds, we can strengthen the force of those. So it's all very malleable still, even though, it's there. So shall we continue?
Dawn, I have one question.
Oh, yes. Sure, Nandini.
Does it matter if there are pets around us while we chant or recite? Does it give them some sort of a merit? Because I know in Kopan they said that Lama Yeshil, Lamas of one of them would take the dogs and make them do prostrations while they were doing it or something. I don't know. I heard it. I don't know if it's true.
Yeah.
But does it make a difference? If we have pets?
Sure. I think it's really good if our animals can hear certainly things that we're doing. Physically, it's very hard for them to do some things.
Yeah.
The stupa that's in the corner there, a stupa is essentially like a reliquary. It houses, usually they put in, if you have physical relics of Buddhas, that's one thing, but at least holy objects, holy mantras and that. Those are said to be really powerful to circumambulate. So if you walked your dog around one of those, and there are some of them that are much larger at Kopan, there's the two in the back there, and there's a few others and everything. But if you circumambulate them with your dogs or cats, if you get your cats to go out for a walk with you, then that's very good for them, they say. Now it gets to be a little bit of, I don't know, people have some of these doubts, I'm sure, around some of these things. But nonetheless, our consciousnesses, as I said, are very malleable, but they're also very impressionable. Like everything can make a positive impression. If we use mantra, which is said to be the sound of the Buddhas in that form, kind of their essence in that form, if we can, use other holy objects and things to bless their minds. Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche is really keen on a lot of this and thinks that this is really why we have animals in our life, is to do that for them. Not just feed them and take care of them, take them to the doctor when they're sick, that kind of thing, but rather to really care for them spiritually.
Couldn't I say the same for the cockroach that lives in the corner of my kitchen?
Absolutely, yeah. So we can do that for any animals. Rinpoche is amazing when you see him. He'll be at like at Light of the Path in North Carolina, where even an animal that has deceased, you can still work with the body of that animal because there's some connection still. So there's one time, I think it was the first retreat, where a snake had just gotten run over in the road, and so he just stopped there and stopped the whole crowd that was kind of behind him and did mantra recitation for that snake. But so yeah, for the cockroaches, for the ants, for the whoever is out there, if you see a being and you have that opportunity, and there's lots of videos of Rinpoche in like parking lots where there's a dog in the car and he'll, scream mantras through the open window of the car, so that the dog hears these. It's quite incredible. Anyway, that's a whole other teaching. But thank you for bringing that up. Go to YouTube, you can see some videos of Rinpoche doing animal stuff. It's quite great. All right, so we were talking about these delusions, identifying the afflictions. Again, this is the first of the 3 difficulties. So we have 3 difficult things. First is kind of knowing when they arise, being attentive and identifying, as Venerable Pema Chodron says, seeing neuroses as neuroses, identifying what's going on as something faulty. Well, one of the most pernicious, faulty minds that we have is this mind of attachment. As I said, it's kind of our default mode. What we're always coming from throughout our day is just like constantly seeking something to fill that gaping hole that we have within us that just wants to be experiencing pleasure. And we get very addicted to the outside things that induce that, but we can also have attachment to a lot of other things that aren't necessarily outside objects. You can have attachment to ideas and thoughts and other things that we bring up mentally. But most of what we have attachment and desire for are the sense objects. So when we're relating to a sense object, it's beginning with it's contaminated, meaning that it's still together with us in this kind of deluded world, this world that is produced through karma and delusions. And it's over-exaggerating its attractiveness, it's making it bigger than what it is, and then wanting it, taking a strong interest in it, and even not wanting to be parted from it. This is what attachment feels like. An example even is, I think His Holiness uses this in the book called The Meaning of Life. He says, okay, say you're in a store and you're looking for something to buy for yourself, and something kind of catches your eye, and then you maybe look at it, and then you walk around the store and you don't see anything else, and you then come back to that object, and it looks like it's almost better than it was than when you first saw it. And then you kind of pick it up and you start to look at it and you go, oh, this would look really good on my mantelpiece or whatever, maybe on your altar if it's something. You might get attached to things like that even in that way, but it's something that you really start to admire and feel really good about. And then you actually make the decision you're going to buy it, right? So there's like a greater sense of investment in it, if you will, from emotionally in terms of your attachment. And then you go up and you pay your money, and then all of a sudden it's yours. And we know that there's a different feeling to that, because say it were to fall off the counter accidentally after you'd already bought it, after you'd invested in it as yours, or after you took it home and you put it on the mantelpiece and then it fell off, you'd feel so much different than if it fell off the shelf when it was at the store, right? Because you don't have the investment in it yet. Your attachment hasn't clung to it in that way, as something that is yours and has kind of that possessiveness that goes along with attachment frequently. And of course, one of the things I want to point out that we're going to get into, when we say it over-exaggerates its attractiveness, we can say that to some degree, there's no real attractiveness from the side of that object anyway. The attractiveness is something that we determine. Because that thing that, going back to the store analogy, right? You're walking around the store and you see something that attracts your eye. Well, if it was inherently attractive, if it was attractive and had that all imbued in it, somebody would have bought it by then, right? Somebody would have already taken it. You know, we know that we all have different things that we find attractive. I find it interesting when I travel. I'm often staying in people's homes, and I just go through that little exercise of like looking at the things that people are attracted to. That they, I'm not saying they're attached. Maybe that might be going too far, but it's interesting the things that people decide that they want in their lives. You know, and it's very different. It's unique for every one of us. We go to somebody's house and we say, wow, they bought a lot of junk. Or they bought a lot of beautiful things. It depends upon our own inclination towards seeing them as attractive or not. You see what I mean? But if everything that we saw that was attractive for everyone else, then everybody would have the same things in their house. There would be no need for any kind of diversity. You'd walk into everyone's home and be immediately attracted to everything that they had on their shelves. So we can see that we're even over-exaggerating just what is there in terms of it not really being there in a sort of intrinsic way. It's all sort of karmically determined. Why do we fill our homes with particular things? Because those are what we find beautiful in terms of our own karma. There's that phrase, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And it's really true. It's like there's no other beauty there. The object isn't beautiful from its own side. This is already hinting at kind of the deeper level of investigation we can do with these objects. Let's go on to the next one, which is the second of the three root afflictions. So the previous one was when we get something pleasant, and we go through that process of over-exaggerating, pulling it towards us, not wanting to be parted from it. This is the exact opposite reaction. It's something unpleasant. You don't have a good experience with it. It's something that, you know, makes you feel bad in whatever way, sounds that you don't want to hear, tastes that you don't like, you know, whatever they might be. And again, it can even be mental stuff that we create that we don't like. So this is the more technical definition of this. It's a distinct mental factor that, in reference to one of three objects, the being or object by whom we're being harmed, the suffering that occurs through our being harmed, or the reasons for which we're being harmed, whatever that might be. Again, anything that entails us being harmed in any way. By harmed, we don't mean like physically wounded. We mean having a negative experience, having an unpleasant experience. So, in reference to any one of these types of things, it agitates the mind through being unable to bear or through intending to cause harm to the object. This is when it becomes a little more elevated. But initially it's that idea that we can't bear it. We don't want to be in the presence of it. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to see it. We don't want to taste it. We don't want to whatever. We want to be parted from it, separated from it. Now, it doesn't mention this in the definition here, but that mind's over-exaggerating too. Over here we had the pleasant stuff, and it was painting the entire thing pleasant. The chocolate cake is pleasant. Every little molecule, every atom of it is absolutely in the nature of pleasant experience, happiness. Over here, we're painting the entire thing that's unfavorable to be unfavorable, you know, all the way through. There's nothing that we see that is favorable at that time. We don't see any good qualities. This is why, again, we're capable of developing great hatred for people and thinking that they are entirely evil, entirely awful. And that's not an accurate picture at all, because we're blind at that time to many of the positive qualities of that person. All we're seeing is the negative portrait that we've painted of them. So when we have something unpleasant, we're not denying that it's unpleasant. And it's unpleasant for you in the moment to have that feeling. Because essentially what's happened is you've got two main different feelings that we're vacillating between during our day. The pleasant feelings that we get quite attached to, and the unpleasant feelings that we're quite averse to and that we push away. And this is what our lives are like. You know, we're just constantly trying to keep this happening and that from happening. And so this is how these minds operate. They operate at a pretty subtle level sometimes. But if we examine them closely, we see that both of them are exaggerating the unpleasantness over here, the pleasantness over here. We're not embracing the totality of any of those objects. So Venerable Rabina, when she teaches, she often talks about how, like, Adolf Hitler as an example, he's somebody who we can obviously say did a lot of horrible things with his human life. You know, did things that, you still are unconscionable. But is Adolf Hitler an evil person, like all the way through? Well, Venerable Robina just points out, even Adolf, loved his little doggy Woggy, loved his dogs, the people in his life that he was close to, still had love and compassion and care and concern for those people. Limited, obviously, didn't have it for many other people that were exterminated by, Hitler and Nazi Germany and what have you through the horrible means that they used. But still had those positive qualities. Well, when we're hating Hitler, when we're putting that negative thing on him and painting him, with that, we're totally ignoring those positive qualities. We can't see that those exist at all. So this is kind of what this mind is doing with regard to either objects or people or situations. Whatever it is that we're experiencing that's unpleasant, we make it into totally unpleasant. Of course, it ignores the fact that sometimes we actually can do something favorable in the midst of all of that. That when that person is demonstrating how they're under the control of their own anger, they're getting mad at us, yelling at us, and so on, we can actually use that to our benefit. There's actually something positive in that, in terms of we can see them through the lens of compassion. We can develop greater qualities that in relation to that person. We can even, acknowledge that there's something to be learned by developing patience and tolerance in that moment. So we're blind to all of that potential. We only see it as, this is unfavorable, I want it out of my life. And so these are the main two forces that are guiding us in our day. Attachment that wants to get what we want and gets, very grasping at that, wants to make sure that happens. And then the aversion or the anger that arises when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when we have to face what is unpleasant. So we're vacillating between these two. And by using this word like anger, aversion is kind of an interesting word, because aversion feels to me like that initial kind of turning away. Somebody said it sounds like, the mind that you have towards a vegetable you don't like or something, I've got an aversion to those. But we see that there's gradations in this one in particular, that aversion can lead to maybe some annoyance, to some irritation, to some, maybe anger at that point, hatred, malice. Really horrible states of mind that can be developed on the basis of something unpleasant in our lives that we're not relating to in a healthy way. As I said, we can't deny that this is an unpleasant feeling for you, but you're not seeing it accurately when you make the whole thing unpleasant, when you think there's nothing of any value over there and you push it out of your life. Again, because this often leads to causing harm to others, engaging in unskillful actions ourselves that cause us harm. So these are the two main afflictions that if you examine, again, we haven't gotten yet to your sharing of what came up for you in the meditation this morning, but if you examine whatever harmful habit you have, anything that you have that is disturbing to your mind that you want to be rid of, you'll see that it's probably rooted in one of these two, either anger or attachment. It can also be rooted in the third one, which is ignorance, but it's probably going to be primarily one of those two. Let's use as an example fear. Maybe somebody feels like they have a real irrational fear that is problematic in their life. That they really are fearing something that maybe it's not completely grounded in reality, or maybe they even had an experience earlier in their life that led them to be very fearful. So if you look at that fear, where is that fear coming from, for example? Who would say that it's coming from anger or aversion?
Aversion.
Fear?
Yeah, aversion.
Yeah, I think there's an element that you could say that is definitely, it's an aversion to future pain that may or may not even exist, a future difficult experience that may or may not exist. And so fear is definitely saying, I don't want to experience that, so I'm going to stay in this place of kind of feeling somewhat threatened by this possible experience that could be coming my way. Of course, it might be a more imminent experience where we're feeling fear in the moment because we feel threatened. But nonetheless, it's not wanting to experience that unpleasant sensation. I think fear is quite closely tied to aversion. But of course, it's also got some attachment involved in it too, because we often don't want to let go of the things that we have. We become fearful of losing them. So it's that mind of grasping onto our comfort and our security and not wanting to be separated from that causes us to be very fearful. So even though, this isn't saying fear is one of our main delusions, obviously fear is a big problem for us in our lives. It can be a driving force in some ways. If we use it skillfully, we actually can find there's something that we call wholesome fear, where it's good to be somewhat fearful of certain things, like fearful of being reborn as an animal. There's no problem there, because then that means you'll engage in all the activities that will help you to die knowing that you're not going to be reborn as an animal, knowing that you created the causes for a good rebirth as a human. Or the fear that also just doesn't want you to die in a confused and crazy state, that wants to work on calming your mind through meditation so that when death comes, you'll be more at peace and not be screaming and grasping and all this other kind of stuff. So there's a lot of wholesome fear that can come about, but when it's diluted, when it's afflicted, it's grounded in one of these, or both of these. The deeper level of affliction that is actually behind those two, though, this idea of delusion, the deepest delusion, is called ignorance or confusion. By this we mean, this is again the technical definition, an afflicted state of unknowing brought about by the mind being unclear about the nature of such things as karma, the law of cause and effect, the triple gem, which are the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and so forth. And in so forth are included a whole lot of things. The very nature of reality that we're going to discuss tomorrow afternoon, we're quite unclear about that too. That's the deepest level of ignorance. But we have a lot of other ignorance that's a bit coarser, but affects us greatly. So if we talk about, for example, not knowing about karma, the fact that we live our lives not knowing that this mechanism is always operating, that we are experiencing the results of our past actions, and that what we do in the present is going to determine our future experiences. Well, if you're blind to that, then you're not going to pay attention to how you actually go about creating happiness and avoiding suffering, right? So ignorance is operating at that level to really keep us from knowing what it is that will bring about our fundamental desire. Remember I mentioned this morning that this starting point for all of the Buddha's teachings is that we all want to be happy and don't want to suffer. But we're all very confused about how to do that. That's because mainly we don't know about the law of cause and effect. We used to joke over in where I was studying in Italy that we could see a headline on the papers everywhere that would say karma, the cause of everything. Like that would be like the big finding in the world, the day that everybody figures out in the world that karma is causing everything. When you get that for yourself, when that's your own headline, when you kind of go, oh wow, I am the creator of my experiences. What I'm experiencing now, I created. It's very empowering. It actually kind of shows you that you're in the driver's seat. Very firmly in the driver's seat. And you've been driving forever, you just didn't always know the rules of the road, and so you were driving a bit haphazardly. Now that you know that you're in the driver's seat, that you're in charge, well then you can make better decisions. So we see that ignorance or confusion is frequently underneath a lot of our delusions, a lot of our harmful habits, because we're not really clearly understanding what the nature of those are, where they come from, how we continue to buy into them, and so on. One of the effects of karma is to create habitual tendencies. That why you're really dealing with anger a lot is because you've gotten really good at anger through planting that seed again and again and again. Karmically, you've created that. So once we have some understanding of the law of cause and effect, that gets rid of some level of ignorance. It's not going to get rid of the deeper level of ignorance, which once more we'll explore tomorrow afternoon. But this is the idea that believing in a reality that isn't really there. There is a reality that is there, but what is there is really very slight. Most of what we build up is once more an exaggeration, a fabrication. So these are the three main delusions that are involved in everything else that we have, all the harmful habits that we have in our mind. So before I go on to the causes of that, I just want to, now will be the time if you would like to share anything from your own investigation. Again, in the morning meditation, what we did, just to remind you, was I asked you to look at what was the main harmful habit or a few harmful habits that you'd like to address over the weekend. and do your own investigation into where do those come from? What are the causes of that? So you don't have to share. Like I said, this is not about bearing your soul and letting everyone else know what's going on in your own monkey mind. It's rather about just being willing to share what insight you might have had by investigating the causes of that. What do you see as causes of your own negative states of mind? Anyone? Yeah, Lama.
Yeah, and when you were talking about that and about karma, what popped up in my mind is why they say that ignorance always comes. There's anger, there's attachment, and then there's ignorance is like a big thing. Is because if you understand dependent origination,
right,
you would also understand there is no I that creates the karma.
Right.
So the ignorance is basically we're not seeing things as they really are because we identify with that solid, the solid I of everything.
Yeah. That kind
Which
of
is the main
concrete, right?
ignorance,
Yeah.
which is not to say we have to communicate like this is, oh, that's your soda, oh, no, that's mine, but it doesn't necessarily mean on its own, it's.
Right. So this is definitely one of the main causes, is this sort of mistaken conception that we have that is at the very root of all of it, that we never even question until we encounter teachings or some sort of doorway through which we start to examine the nature of the self, of the person, nature of phenomena around us. Okay, good. Any other things that came up for people in terms of your own investigation? And there's no right answer to this. This is just, Nandini.
I realized that I was addicted to my suffering, so I kind of identified with it. So I kept putting myself in the situations that would hurt me and cause me suffering.
I see.
And I would keep seeing myself in the situation and kind of question myself, but then I see that I was somehow, because of my attachment, I was drawn towards these situations.
I see. Okay. Good. Not good that you have that, but good that you share that. So again, we see that again, our thought processes that are underneath the surface that sometimes we might not even be aware of, how much we are attached to a self-image or to an idea of something that we see ourselves, and just continue to experience the same thing again and again until we become aware of that. Good. I think that's a bit of what you were saying, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Ralph.
Yes. So the hamster wheel is interesting. But what came up for me was self-loathing. That tends to be a habit of mine.
Okay.
Of mine.
Uh-huh.
Has been for many years, causing lots of suffering. What's behind it seems to be your question.
Right.
Or what I'm able to observe about what's behind it. And I do believe that it's messaging that I received as a child.
Right.
From
Good.
my parents.
That's another one that we're going to be examining as well. This is really a common one, is that we are influenced by the things around us that give us messages that are not truthful either, that are not in accord with our best well-being. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that on Thursday night in the self-compassion class, taking care of ourselves, being friends with ourselves. This is a hard one in our culture. We have this a lot. You're not alone, This is very epidemic in our culture, to have a negative view of ourselves, to self-denigrate, self-loathing, self-hatred even, pretty strong terms, depending on the strength of that emotion. And it's frequently messages we get from outside of ourselves. Anyone else? Anything else that you saw? Again, if you want to share the particular pattern, that's fine. You don't have to. You can just simply say, well, what I see as one cause is, and just be very generic about it. But yeah, Hope.
I tend to worry about future events that may or may not even arise. I guess because I'm afraid that I won't be able to handle it.
Right.
Just ridiculous example. This morning I met a friend for breakfast, and the entire time, from when I got up to when I actually left, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to take a left turn onto Oakland Park Boulevard from the restaurant. Because there might be cars or just
Yeah, I understand.
couldn't handle it.
Yeah. So again, there's some conceptualization going there, no doubt, going on there about kind of increasing what the real threat is into this larger than life kind of thing. And that's a bit of that exaggeration. We're going to talk about that because not only has it played a role in terms of looking at these delusions themselves, but it plays a role in a lot of our thought processes where we make things so much bigger than they are.
And I learned it from my mother. I can see her doing the same thing.
That's another outside influence that's also going to be one of these causes that we're going to look at. Great, you guys have identified some of these that really do play a role. So let me share what came in the traditional teachings. These are called the 6 causes of the affliction. So remember, in this first category, this first difficulty of identifying the afflictions, the first topic we looked at was the 3 root afflictions or delusions. And then we're going to go into kind of the causes of these. So identifying the afflictions is benefited by also knowing their causes. And this is the text that Venerable Tendrin is teaching on Tuesday nights when she's here. She has this month off while I'm here. The Lamrim Chenmo, the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path. And this is in volume 1 of that if you need to know. But Lama Tsongkhapa cites Asanga's bodhisattva levels. This is a more ancient Indian text. Lama Tsongkhapa, just so you know, is the founder of the Geluk tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that we practice here at this center and in our organization. He lived about 600 years ago, 1357 to 1419, something like that, I think are his dates. And so he wrote this most extensive sort of treatise that explains the entire path to enlightenment, that 4th noble truth, the entire path that will lead us to attaining enlightenment from the sutra perspective. And then he's also written some texts from Tantra as well. But anyway, in this text by Lama Tsongkhapa, he explains what Asanga, this Indian Buddhist master, who lived about 2,000 years ago, what he said in terms of the causes of the afflictions. And again, all these teachings derive from what the Buddha taught in the sutras. It's just an expansion upon those. So for our discussion, just so you know, I'm going to alter the order of these 6 factors. When Lama Tsongkhapa presents it and Asanga presents it, they're in a very specific order. But I'm going to alter the order because I want to talk about 3 of them in particular together, because they do all work a bit in tandem. And we'll also examine passages from contemporary teachers on this subject, including the wonderful book where I first met with these teachings, which is Wisdom Energy. I don't know how many of you have read Wisdom Energy by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. They co-wrote it, but there are obviously specific teachings in it that are from one or the other, because this is one of the oldest books we have in the FPMT. Lama Yeshe was the founder of our organization. And then Lama Zopa, of course, is our current spiritual director. The other text that I'm going to share some passages with is the Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, which is a commentary on the text by Lama Tsongkhapa. This is a contemporary commentary by Geshe Sopa, who passed away a few years back. So, the 6 causes of the afflictions. The very first one, and this is from the Great Treatise. This is how Lama Tsongkhapa introduced this. And he doesn't say much in his text, by the way, so you need to kind of go to other texts to get a bit more filling it out, and I'll talk a bit myself about what each of these are. The first one is called basis. And what does basis mean? He says it refers to the latent proclivity for afflictions. What does that mean? There's a bunch of words, right? A bunch of syllables. Essentially what this means is that for any negative state of mind that you have that arises, any harmful habit that you experience, whether it be some kind of projected fear or, self-loathing, or whether it be whatever, any type of pattern that we see in our lives, why does it come up? Because we have the seeds for that. We have the predispositions for that. We have the latencies for that. It means that within your consciousness, because we've been around since beginningless time, we've created seeds in the past by practicing that mind, that plants a seed that then ripens into doing that mind again, and that plants a seed that ripens into doing that mind again. It's just like a continual process, because we always have these predispositions. And what this speaks to then is that until we do the deeper work, we're not going to be completely rid of this. We're always going to have the predisposition for that. You might think, say that anger is your big, harmful habit that you want to get rid of. You might even come to this weekend and learn a lot of tools to working with your anger and to be able to diminish anger greatly. Well, it's going to decrease the power of that anger, but will you have gotten rid of all the seeds of your anger? No, because there will still be something that will come into your sphere of experience that will trigger that delusion to arise. No matter how patient you become, until you remove the seeds or the bases or the predispositions, the latencies of those, you always have the potential for it to arise. So let's look at what Lama Yeshe says. I think these are mostly his teachings in Wisdom Energy. He says, number one, the fundamental cause of the deluded mind is the karmic imprint left on your consciousness by previous non-virtuous actions. Because of past actions done in ignorance and motivated by desire, hatred, or any of the other delusions, various imprints or seeds of karmic instinct have been planted in your mind. When the conditions are right, these seeds ripen and the deluded mind rises again. So we could call these, again, he used the word rather than basis, he called them karmic imprints, which is essentially what we're talking about. Because karma, as I said, is the force of our own mind continually creating particular patterns that then plant a potential or a seed on our mind to ripen into a future experience. Well, here we're mostly talking about the fact that if you get angry, if a driver upsets you and you start honking your horn and flipping them off and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and maybe even get out of your car and threaten them physically, well then you've created a very powerful karma, a karmic imprint on your mind to go to that place of anger. It arose from its own predisposition when you got angry previously. And you're planting a new seed for it to arise in the future. So this is what we are continually caught up in, is this process of planting new seeds, new karmic imprints that give rise to future experiences that are similar. We even call this result the result similar to the cause in terms of our experience. It gives us, I'm sorry, not in terms of our experience, in terms of our behavior. Sorry, I gave it the wrong name. It's the result similar to the cause in terms of our behavior. So why do you have a proclivity to be angry, to have an angry mind? It's because you've got seeds of anger in your mind. Now we can again lessen how much those move to the forefront and cause us to get angry all the time by being patient. But we will always have these predispositions until we do the deeper work to remove them all. Yeah, Paula?
Quick question, John. So would it be kind of safe to say that this is kind of the type of behavior that we learned in the past and that we by default come back to whenever a similar situation comes back? To give you an example from practical life, right? I don't know, I had a few years ago a boss that was very intense and very hard to deal with, right?
Okay.
At that point in time, after a year, I decided I didn't solve for it. I decided to quit the job and went to a job with a fantastic boss.
Right.
Following job comes a boss that was even worse than the previous one that I left, right? I mean, this is real life. And I'm still there, I mean, I wasn't in the Buddhism path, like those days when I left the previous job. But I remember Venerable Robina, when she was here a few weeks ago, she told me that boss is your teacher, and he keeps coming back to you in whatever type of person, because there's something there that you need to learn. Absolutely. And until you're able to break the pattern of how you react to those difficult situations, it's going to only come back. So does this kind of example relate to what you are saying, that we kind of tend to come back to the same reaction or behavior?
To some degree, though we're simply also talking about the fact that we have all of these other sort of latencies that are there for the arisal of a variety of things. So while the pattern that's playing out in your life more prominently right now perhaps is this idea of a boss and what to learn from a negative boss, somebody who's challenging you in that way, you also have kind of a karmic imprint or latency for many other different states of mind as well. It's not that, so anytime that we buy into a particular negative state of mind, a harmful habit, we create an imprint for that to occur again. And for us to kind of, and so it does manifest in terms of particular situations. This is all the stuff that's just within our own minds that are the karmic seeds that we planted. The object, which in your case is a boss that's difficult, is going to be actually the second cause of our delusions, our afflictions. Now, that object is going to be karmically flavored too, because again, not everybody probably finds that person to be a difficult boss, I would think. Maybe there's a few people who actually like that person. You know?
Not that I don't.
Not that you know. Well, maybe their partner or children might like them. But
I'm joking. Yeah, no,
but
I
anyway.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So it does karmically inform our experience of that object, but nonetheless, the primary thing we're talking about here is what's on our own mind that causes us to have a repeated pattern in response to this, as opposed to how does it ripen into the various objects that we experience in our life. But they're all caught, that's why I do these three together, is because they're all caught up in the whole process that we need to begin to untangle and see what's going on. So hold on to what you're talking about. Maybe we'll use that as an example even as we go through this. So if we use Paula's example, then she's got some predisposition that she's planted on her mind that causes the irritation, or I don't know what you experience in the midst of a boss who's like that.
Irritation is a great word.
Yeah, and maybe even frustration and possibly even depression or sadness or whatever. I mean, all these kinds of things. These are all what we mean by these karmic predispositions. The potential that you have to experience them when you come into contact with an object that causes them to arise. That's what the previous one said, right? Left on your consciousness by previous non-virtuous actions, because the past actions done in ignorance, motivated by desire, hatred, or any of the other delusions, imprints have been planted in your mind. And when the conditions are right, when there's that boss that is difficult and challenging, then there's a tendency for those to arise again, because the conditions are all there. So this is something that's pretty heinous. I mean, when you think about it, we've got like a whole storehouse of all these karmic seeds that we've created through our buying into negative states of mind. And don't let that depress you or overwhelm you and think, oh God, there's no hope for me. Because there is. That's what this whole weekend's about, is to give you the tools and the understanding so that you can make decisions going in a different direction. So then if we go to Geshe Sopa's commentary, Steps on the Path, he says, the basis of the afflictions is their latent status as a subtle propensity. This means that whether or not a particular affliction, desire for example, is active and present in the mind at a particular moment, it is continuously abiding in an unconscious level as a potentiality, a seed, a subtle predisposition, or propensity. Until these propensities are eliminated from the root, there remains in every sentient being this readiness for a particular affliction to arise when conducive objects and conditions are met. So in Paula's case, that's there, it's residing. She comes into contact with the annoying boss, the difficult boss, the challenging boss, and it immediately comes to the forefront because you've got the seed for that to happen. Before you met difficult bosses, it wasn't there. But I agree with you, and just back on what Venerable Robina said to you, this is something Pema Chodron has said something essentially the same that I paraphrase, that karma is life giving you the lessons you need to learn. So how karma is playing out in terms of this other thing that we are having experiences that are similar to what we've done in the past, that's how we learn from it. We go, okay, here's somebody manifesting as a difficult boss for me, somebody who's really challenging in my life. How did I create that? You kind of start getting curious about it. Because you don't put all the onus on them. We're not denying that they're doing something difficult or that they're being challenging in their behavior towards us or towards others. What we're talking about here is what caused that to ripen in your life. Why are you the one working for a difficult person? And then you start investigating, like I said, get really curious about that. Well, what does this have to teach me? what is this situation all about? And this is moving a little beyond this, but it's just acknowledging that that is definitely a healthy perspective to have. When you have anything in your life, you know, what do I need to learn from this? Because we can see the force of this seed that wants to ripen into a particular state of mind that we feel very comfortable with. Oh, it's, you know, and everybody even, that's the other factors we're going to get into, everybody even supports us in that, right? Oh, he is a lousy boss, you know, or she, is it he? It's a he, right? You know, he is a lousy boss, he's a horrible person, why do you work for that guy? You get all that kind of influence from friends.
You know, what's interesting too is involvements, right? From individual to coupleship to family unit to community to country to...
Yeah, and those are some of the factors we're going to talk about that are on our list of 6 as well. This whole idea that we're influenced by things outside of ourselves. This one's within you. This is something you created. Yeah, Lama.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I completely disagree with not the actual thing, that I believe what you're saying, but I don't agree from a Buddhist perspective of that if you're in a situation, first of all, unless you know and can see all the billions and billions of causes and effects that arise to that karmic propensity, you know, whether it be negative or positive, that you start to work with somebody that's, you don't meld with so much. So like you say, you left the job and it's happens again. Okay. Why is it that, unless we know the reason, the root, what would be there to learn other than, the way I look at it is, go get another job. You know, I don't see where suffering and then staying in that suffering and then somebody else telling me, because they're not in my mind, that that's my teacher. Yeah, you know, from a real Buddhist perspective, to say, well, you know, just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean we only learn out of suffering. Even though, yes, you can say everything's suffering, but it doesn't mean that you can't learn from a kind boss as well.
Sure.
And
I agree with you, Lama. I guess the thing is that, and it's not denying that the advice that Venerable Rabina gave to Paula is probably very specific for her and her situation. And there could be somebody else in the room who says that, you know, that they feel that they absolutely have to change it because they're going to go and crazy, kill themselves, whatever. And I would say, yes, change your life. I mean, we're definitely, and you're going to see when I get to the slides that have to do with how we react to all of this stuff. How do we actually work with it? How do we counteract the afflictions? One of the first lines of defense, or the first line of defense, is avoidance. If you can change your situation and be away from that, sometimes that's the best place to start, at least. Not ideally where we want to be, because we can't always avoid it. We avoid it with the one boss, and then we go to another job, and we get a different boss who's just the same. And we keep trying to avoid it, and we miss the opportunity to work with it at a deeper level. I agree also that we cannot know all the causes behind it, but there's something that will be evident by virtue of that we can start to look at ourselves and start to work on. I don't know if you're comfortable sharing. Have you discerned any lessons from your work with?
I mean, I have to say that he's actually helping me grow. I can see myself, you know, the kind of dealing with situations that 4 years ago I couldn't deal, you know, like, and it's probably, I mean, there's a part of me that is sometimes, you know, like grateful for him being so intense, you know what I mean? Great. I mean, there's other days, and she knows me well, that it's, you know, like that are darker and that are more difficult to handle, right? But reality is that I think that it's a both way sometimes, you know, like kind of positive interaction.
So again, there is that possibility, and this is all that we're talking about. But the biggest thing I'm going to emphasize when we get to counteracting the afflictions is that you start where you are. You don't start at the point of, inflicting more suffering on yourself because you think that's where you're supposed to be practicing. There's no one rule about how everybody's supposed to practice. But those who initially kind of say, okay, my first line of defense is I'm going to avoid that, because if I extricate myself from that, I know I won't then have the stimulus to be angry. That's the second thing that we're going to look at, factor number 2. So let's continue this discussion once we go through more of these and start to look at how we work with the afflictions. Because there's no cookie cutter mold, again, for every one of us to look exactly the same in terms of our practice.
The initial point is take a look.
Yeah, see what's going on. At least understand what's going on. So we have jumped a little bit to kind of the working with it, which might have been premature because it's important to go through the whole process. But yes, Tina.
Sorry, just real quick, wanted to say from a personal experience, I've had some mean bosses, and I'm a very passive, non-confrontational person.
Uh-huh.
And I've had multiple people in my life that were mean, just really mean.
Right.
And I believe they were my teachers as well, and it taught me to learn to set healthy boundaries, where I never thought I could speak up and say, don't
Right.
talk to me like that. One time it just came out of me, and it shocked him, and he didn't talk to me like that anymore. It was one of those things I've had mean people teach me to set boundaries.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
I think that's another way that we could look at it. Again, we have to... Let's hold on to some of this talk around dealing with it, because, like I said, I'm afraid we're maybe jumping a little bit ahead. It's also time for a break, because we're going to... What time did we end at? 4:30 today, right? 4. So we only have another half hour. No, it's 2:30.
It's 2:30.
Oh yeah, this is about time to stop then, right? No, we've been going an hour. I'm losing track of what. Let's go for another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a break. Sorry, I like adjusting my mind to the hours. So okay, because I forgot this is 2.5 hours this afternoon, right? Okay, all right. Yeah. So let's just do a little bit more if we're okay on doing that. Are you okay, Lamo, and kind of waiting on? Because what you brought up is a very good point. I'm not saying, because I think that, again, I don't want to make it sound like when I gave Paola the positive feedback around what she's doing, I'm not saying that we all do that, that that's what everybody should do. You have an abusive partner in your life, you should stay in that abusive relationship to learn what you can from it. No, I don't mean, I would never want to give that message to anybody, and there's no point in us kind of inflicting suffering upon ourselves or enduring suffering when there are easy ways that we can avoid that suffering. Have some compassion for yourself, But there are some situations where we can go, oh, this is kind of a cue that I need to pay attention to something because I've got something that's recurring in my life and something that I could actually pay attention to if you have the strength to work with it at that level. So let's go on to number 2 then. So number 1 is this idea that you've got this predisposition to be that way. And as was pointed out, you cannot be free from that until these are eliminated from the root. So that's a little discouraging, but that doesn't mean that you can't work with them, because you can find ways constructively to keep them from surfacing and to keep from planting them so that they become stronger and become more predominant in your life. Once more, if somebody says, they think of themselves as being very angry all the time, well, they didn't get that way without the causes and conditions, and one of them was the fact that every time that they buy into anger, they plant another predisposition to be angry. They keep strengthening the power of those. Number 2 is the object. This is what the great treatise Lama Tsongkhapa says. Object refers to the appearance of objects conducive to the arising of an affliction. It's real simple. None of you mentioned this when we were talking about particular things, but the idea is that we don't have these delusions arising, these harmful habits arising on the basis of nothing at all. They arise on the basis of an object, be it a physical object, such as a person that we're reacting to, or an imagined object, something that we are thinking of. Your example, Hope, of taking this future experience of having to make a left turn or whatever that might be, and imagining it to be so much worse than it was. So we have objects that appear to our minds that can be, again, outside of ourselves or within ourselves, and they are conducive to the arisal of a particular affliction. And we see that, again, that's quite specific with regard to each of us. You know, I sometimes use the example of music because we all do like different types of music. And different, you know, even within a particular genre, different artists that do particular music. So if we examine a particular object that we find annoying or difficult, for example, and, you know, I'll admit for me it's kind of, I'm not a big fan of rap and hip hop, sorry. I like classical music. So that's just, again, no judgment, because there are people who love rap and hip hop, who will play it like blaring out of their cars as they go down the street. And they're enjoying the hell out of it. You know, that for them is an object that brings up attachment. For me, it's an object that brings up aversion. And if I were going down the street blaring Bach at them, they'd probably be equally annoyed. Not that I blare Bach, but you know, so the reality is that the object is kind of tailor-made for us. It's what is conducive to the arising of our particular afflictions. Because there's nothing, again, that makes it pleasant or unpleasant from its own side, really. It's taking on that flavor based upon our own karmic propensity. So again, the boss or whatever is a bit of our karmic creation in terms of we've informed that with those particular qualities from our side, they have those particular qualities that they're manifesting towards us, and we've met with the object that causes the arisal of our frustration, our irritation, whatever. So let's look more at what's said about this, and then we can discuss it a little bit. So, wisdom energy, Lama Yeshe, he says, the object itself is the second factor that encourages this ripening. Most of the time when the object is near you and the karmic imprint is in your mind, bang, delusion arises. This is how Lama Yeshe always talked, they said. So if you come into proximity with an object that is tailor-made for the arisal of your particular delusion, you're there, you know, and if you've got the seed for it, well then you've got two of the factors that are going to be really ripe for that to happen, for whatever it is that your harmful habit or pattern is to occur. This is what Geshe Sopa says. He says, the object causing an affliction to arise is the conducive condition that awakens that subtle propensity into a fully active affliction. When you plant a dry seed in the ground, it needs supporting conditions such as moisture, warmth, nutrients in order to sprout and grow into a flower. In the same way, all sentient beings have within them the seed or subtle propensity for the afflictions to blossom, and when a suitable object is encountered, it acts as the supporting condition, enabling the afflictions to arise in full flower. So these two are already really quite involved, and this is the beginning. We're going to look at three. Three is also there together with these. But these two absolutely have to be there for the affliction to arise. You have to have the seed of that affliction there, that negative propensity that you have on your mind, and then some object that stimulates it. As I said, it can be outside us physically, but can even be a memory or some other mental thing that we create. Now, were there some comments or questions?
Cause and condition.
Cause and condition, absolutely. So this is what we're looking at, and going through these 6 causes is kind of really understanding what's behind attachment arising, for example. First of all, you have the proclivity for that. You've engaged in desirous attachment for many, many things. But particularly, a specific object comes into your field of awareness, and then it becomes really strong because you have something around that object, a karmic energy with that object, that causes you to see it as really delicious and delightful and wonderful. It's like that object in the gift shop where you're walking around and you decide that you're going to buy something for yourself. It's speaking to you because you've got that karmic propensity. And you also have kind of a view of it that makes it quite favorable. You've got the ability for attachment to arise, and it's an object that meets your attachment quota. It says, this is worthy of attachment for me. This is inducing enough pleasure in my mind that I want that object for myself. So this is how all the delusions are arising, are on the basis of something outside of ourselves be it, again, a person or a experience or an object or whatever, I mean a physical object, and it acts as that condition, and then we also have the seed for the particular affliction in relation to that to arise. Does everybody see that? Kind of these two factors and how they're playing a role? Of course, what this points to, what we're going to examine, certainly what Lamo brought up, is that frequently, our first line of defense is to get rid of the object, not to annihilate it, but to get it out of our sphere of experience, to say, okay, I'm going to separate myself from that object. But as we're going to see, we can do that physically, but we can even do that mentally to some degree, to not be kind of quite so caught up in the object. But this is, again, like maybe some of you in the room have dealt with alcoholism or substance abuse, you know that if you want your first line of defense in not drinking again or not using again is don't be around the stuff. Don't be at the bar with where all the alcohol is. Don't go to the liquor store. I mean, those places are forbidden. Why? Because the pull of those objects is so strong on you. You need the strength of mind to be able to contain the predispositions you have to go after those things before you can be in the presence of that object. So the first line of defense, as we're going to see, is avoid the object if you have a way of doing that. Sometimes objects are harder to avoid. The boss keeps coming back in a new form and a new job, So, all right. This is a continuation of what Keshe Sopa says to conclude this. He says, with regard to the object, it can be helpful to talk about the subtle way. Oh, this isn't Keshe Sopa, this is me giving you a little bit more on this. Sorry. But it's based on teachings that I've listened to from Pema Chodron. And it's also in her book, I think it's called Taking the Leap. Taking the Leap, I think, is the book where she talks about this. He says it can be helpful to talk about the subtle way that we get involved in them through grasping, and Pema Chodron uses the Tibetan term Shempa, which she translates as getting stuck or getting hooked. This is actually a term that she learned from her teacher, Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. Actually, Lynn is at a retreat with, she's heading to the retreat in Colorado, or maybe it's even started with Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche, who's Pema Chodron's main teacher these days. So, I don't have slides for this. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about this idea. And it's kind of an interesting teaching. When I first heard it, I've never heard Lama Zopa teach about this. I've never heard any of the teachers in our tradition teach about it. But I think it's really worth sharing because there's something that is happening at this very minute level, this very instantaneous level, that is kind of a force that we have to become a little bit more aware of. Maybe we don't have the wherewithal to become aware of it right from the beginning. Martine Batchelor, who's a Zen practitioner from the Korean Zen tradition, refers to it as grasping simply. And she says, grasping is a primordial pattern. We often feel that the world is sticky or that we are somehow adhesive. Things stick to us. Each time we come into contact with an object through our senses, visual objects, sound, smells, taste, sensations, or our thoughts, the pattern of grasping has an opportunity to manifest. So what's happening here is what she's talking about, what Martine is, and then what Pema Chodron is talking about through her teacher, is the idea that, okay, you have the object here, and you have the predisposition. There's like this moment where we suddenly are like stuck to the object. Suddenly the object is kind of pulling us in a different way. We're taking a slightly elevated interest in it. And it's not something that happens at a real strong conceptual level. It's something that almost feels like an impulse. Let me read how Pema Chodron talks about this in terms of what she calls, again, Shenpa, which is the Tibetan word for this grasping. She translates it, as I said, as getting stuck or getting hooked. And she says, an alternate translation of Shenpa might be hooked, what it feels like to get hooked, what it feels like to be stuck. Everyone likes to hear teachings on getting unstuck because they address such a common source of pain. And so she talks about a poison ivy metaphor, like that there's kind of the the itch that we have from that, that needs to be scratched, and it's our sort of habit of scratching on top of it. This is kind of where these two come together. The itch that's produced by the poison ivy and our desire to immediately scratch, our desire to immediately go to that object. So she says, here's how it shows up in everyday experience. Somebody says a harsh word and something in you tightens. Instantly, you're hooked. That tightness quickly spirals into blaming the person or denigrating yourself, which is all the stuff that we're going to talk about next, that third cause, where we start going into a whole conceptual overlay, a process on the basis of that. But at this point, where we've got just these two factors, the predisposition and the object appearing, there's something that kind of ripens in the moment that causes us to get stuck in that object, causes us to latch onto that object. They say, Pema Chodron goes into a lot of extensive teachings on this, and I'm not going to share because it's maybe a little bit off topic from where we want to go with this idea. But if we have a real strong attentiveness, we can catch it right at that moment and let it go and not get so involved in all these things. Not allow that predisposition to arise and not necessarily have to detach from the object in terms of physically remove ourselves, just mentally remove ourselves. Because this Shenpa is a mental urge. It's like the urge to scratch the itch. It's like the urge to have that thing in our lives if it's an object that we find pleasant, an urge to push the object out if it's something that we find unpleasant. So I don't know if that helps. I found it really useful, and again, her teachings on this are worth taking a look at if you're curious about this idea. Some, again, kind of impulse that we have almost innately within us to go towards those things. And it's not, again, that it can be pleasant or it can be unpleasant, but we're kind of getting stuck in it, getting kind of caught up in it. And of course, it's a very subtle level of a predisposition we're talking about. If we can pay attention to it, I think it can be quite useful. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there for what it's worth. Yeah,
she has
Tracy.
archery videos on YouTube if anybody's interested on archery. I remember her
On
about the itch.
Yeah.
That people don't want to have to buy the book.
Sure, you can listen to that.
They're busy doing stuff, they can listen to.
Yeah. And I think she even has some teachings. I have read some things that are out on her website that you can download, on this whole topic. You don't have to, go running after accumulating things. So this is just, again, to identify that there is something that's happening there, because why do we become stuck around particular objects again? There's something out that draws us to them.
The chemistry? Well, of course it's our karma, but...
it is, I think what we're talking about at a very subtle level is this karmic kind of grasping that happens. It is kind of this impulse that we have karmically that causes to get stuck right in that moment. But the detachment can happen if we are able to notice what's going on. That's where, again, because we all have particular, and you might think about yourself, let's work with attachment mostly on this one. I think it's easier to see. When we have objects that bring us some kind of enticement, that make us feel really like, oh, we have to run out there and get that or whatever, we see that it's got some kind of hook that we've gotten caught up in that causes us to see it that way. And as I said, other people won't have that hook with it. Other people aren't, hooked by that classical music or rap music or whatever it is that we are so attached to. Yes, Gina?
I was just going to say, this is really helpful for me because I always wonder why I get so focused or obsessed on things that ostensibly I have an aversion to. And it's a little bit like what Hope was saying before about like worrying and thinking about making the left turn. I do that in so many ways, and my mind keeps going back, whether it's daydreaming or fantasizing, things I don't like, whether it's angry conversations or stuff I'm worried about happening. And I never really heard it explained this way, so I find that really, really helpful. To think that, in a weird way, I'm attached to my aversions or I'm like stuck to my aversions. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I think it's really a useful tool. And we see it really quite clearly with the attachment stuff, but it's there with the aversion stuff too, absolutely. Because it's hooking us, it's causing us to be in that kind of relationship with it. And it's a relationship that's not pleasant, but we still are hooked. We're still kind of,
Thanks.
Good, you're welcome. Let's take a break then, if we could. Take about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and we'll go till 4 o'clock. I'd say the breaks are going to be 20 minutes, because then they'd be like a half hour, 40 minutes. It's hard, I know. And it's good to have the breaks. I'm a big fan of breaks in classes, because it gives people a chance to connect to each other, and that's an important part of being here as well. I'm just going to share one quick little passage from an article. I mentioned, that there's a lot of other things that Pema Chodron has out there. This one's from, well, it was from Shambhala Sun, which was what Lion's Roar was before. That's the name of the magazine now. And it's an article called How We Get Hooked and How We Get Unhooked. And I'm just going to read one short paragraph from that, where she talks about this thing. She says, the Tibetan word for this is shenpa. It's usually translated attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be hooked. This is similar to what I said before. When shenpa hooks us, we're likely to get stuck. You could call shenpa that sticky feeling. It's an everyday experience. Even a spot on your new sweater can take you there. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing, not wanting to be where we are. That's the hooked quality. That tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. So she's talking about that in the negative side, the unpleasant thing, but it's still, you're getting hooked, but it's causing you to have that aversion response to it. But it's because the mind's hooked. When it's over here on the pleasant stuff, when attachment is arising, it's getting hooked and then wanting that to be pulled into our experience. That's what ensues or follows from that. But it all starts from that moment of Shenpa. So as I said, there's many teachings out there that you can look at that she's given on this. You won't find it in any other Gelugpa teachings. It's real interesting. I don't know. But I think it's worth looking at if you kind of have some desire to do that. So this thing does keep going in and out. Maybe might need a new battery, but let's leave it for a second and see. I'll set it over here so it's not in my lap. But any questions on these first two again? The basis, the predispositions, the karmic imprints, and then the object. Let's go on to the third one. The third one is the kind of conceptual process that we get caught up in on the basis of meeting that object with the predisposition for that to arise. This is called attention. Sometimes you even hear the word inappropriate attention or incorrect attention. As it says here, that refers to an incorrect attention that projects pleasantness onto what has an unpleasant character. It conceives an impermanent thing to be permanent and the like. So this is all of the thought processes that we engage in regard to that object that cause us to have an arisal of greater attachment or greater aversion, whatever the case might be. So the seed is there for it to ripen. This is one of the major factors that helps it to come forward and to also be strengthened, because we continue to feed all of that. It's kind of like, again, that idea of the object that you see in the store. The first time you walk by, it kind of catches your eye and looks somewhat different than the other objects, but then you go looking around and you come back to it and it seems like it's even more pleasant than it was before. And then you look at it the third time and you pick it up and you hold it, and it's like you're overlaying with your conceptual mind more and more attractiveness to this object that has no inherent attractiveness. Because many people have walked by that object and not found it attractive at all. So, hate to tell you that. That's true for every object in your house. There's nothing that you own that everyone on the planet is going to find as attractive. It just doesn't happen that way.
Is this like the story then?
This is the storyline. This is a part of this. This is definitely, I'm going to go into as part of this some of the additional ways we could say that our conceptual mind isn't getting involved. And storyline can even be bigger than that, but it's at least investing with some sort of repeated message that we start buying into that's unrealistic. It's not in line with reality. Because the pleasantness, as I said, isn't really there. The unpleasantness isn't really there. Yes, you're having an unpleasant experience and a pleasant experience. But where does it really exist? It's a creation of your own mind in terms of the overlay that you're putting on there. Let's look at some of the other words that Lama Yeshe uses first. The third factor, and I put that in brackets because again, remember I'm changing the order of these somewhat, so this isn't the third factor as it's presented traditionally. Also concerns things that appear interesting. When the memory of something comes, you make a certain type of judgment about it. This thing is so good, it is fantastic, it has this quality and that quality and this and that. You exaggerate tremendously the worth of something until it does not resemble the original at all. It has become merely the product of your mistaken conceptualization. You know, so this is what's going on with this. We're mistakenly conceptualizing things, putting all sorts of stuff on top of them, painting them into something that isn't even in line with reality. Of course, the subtlest one is that we think that there's a real object there to begin with. That's the deeper, misconception that we're all operating from that, again, we'll look at tomorrow afternoon. But this is happening at a course level as well. We're kind of imbuing it with all kinds of qualities. It's this, it's that. It's so delicious, so delightful, so wonderful. And of course, we tend to do this often with people, and it becomes very problematic because we build them into something that's so much bigger than they are, better than they are, and then when they don't live up to it, we get upset, because they aren't fulfilling our storyline, our idea of who they should be. So we can see that this is one of the most important things to pay attention to. And this is where we have probably a greater ability to lessen our delusions if we can work with it, but it is harder to work with our thoughts. There's that wonderful bumper sticker, don't believe everything you think. Well, this is because a lot of what we think isn't in line with reality, isn't an accurate painting of reality. So Lama Yeshe continues, he says, seeing some kind of desirable object then always involves overestimation. Its good aspects are emphasized so much that you lose all judgment about it. Simultaneously, this is the deeper ignorance, the deeper mistaken conceptualization. You view that object as if it were somehow self-existent, as if it were pleasant from its own side, as if it were real from its own side. So again, all of that is speaking to the deeper ignorance that's at play, that we don't even it's not an intentional conceptualization. It's not like, oh, here's something appearing to me, I need to see it as self-existent, or I want to see it as self-existent. This is something that is very strongly arising through the force of these karmic imprints. We have the karmic imprint for ignorance that is very firmly rooted in our minds, because this has been our default too at a deeper level. What is always going on, well, not always, let's not go to that extreme. What is almost always going on is that we are adhering to things as if they existed from their own side, as if they had that self-existence in regard to their identity, and also in regard to all the properties, the qualities that they have within that identity. So we think things are, again, existing on their own. We'll explore this more tomorrow afternoon. But this is this deeper level of mistaken conceptualization that is involved. He continues then saying, you conceive of it as something permanent, existing self-sufficiently, the way it appears to you. You fail to see that the way it appears is actually a function of your own projections. So we are projecting it almost all the time on things, overlaying all kinds of stuff. On fearful situations that we're anticipating, we're overlaying a whole set of negative consequences that may or may not ensue, most likely won't ensue. I mean, it was interesting in 2016, the week before the election, I came back from my travel, and every Sunday then after that was after the election. And it was interesting how much fear and anxiety was in people's minds on the basis of the new president. And he's lived up to some of it. But nonetheless, I think our fears and anxiety that many people had were much more extreme than what's actually happened. I mean, not to say, I'm not in any way downgrading what has happened. And that's not denying that there are certain actions and things, again, that people engage in. But we do an awful lot of projecting. We do an awful lot of exaggerating. making somebody into something that's so much more villainous than what they actually are, or so much more dangerous than what they actually are. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to that. It also doesn't mean that we don't do things to act in opposition to things that we see in the world where people are being treated unfairly, unjustly, where harm is being done by others. It means that we have to have a mind that's seeing it clearly and not painting the whole picture with a negative spin, because there are also positive things. And if anything, if you're going to get somebody who's negative to change, to become somebody better, you have to cue into what's positive about them. You have to help them to know that in themselves and to develop that in themselves. So if you paint the whole person as evil, well then what chance do you have to ever change them? If you're thinking they're inherently evil, that's the entirety of their being. Well then, there's no way to ever change that. But the reality is every one of us can change. No. But we can become a factor to help them to change. Kind of a catalyst, if you will. This is the goal of Buddhism when we talk about enlightenment. You want to become a Buddha. Why? Not so you can sit there all blissed out in your Buddha state at the Buddha bar with the other Buddhas, you know. It's sharing Buddha stories over Buddha lunch and the Buddha bowl, right? They have a Buddha bowl at the restaurants, you know. That's not why you become a Buddha. You become a Buddha so you can be a force of change in the world. And because you have all the knowledge, like Lama was pointing out, we don't have all the knowledge of all the karma of even ourselves, much less other beings.
But only devotion, like you were saying.
Well, but exactly. But a Buddha will have greater skills in knowing what might be an opening that I wouldn't know. You know, so this is where, admittedly, if somebody is sort of karmically blocked from receiving the benefit of a Buddha, there's not much that can be done in that moment, even by the Buddha. A Buddha enlightened being just keeps sending that love and compassion and the willingness to help and the desire to help, and the being's going to be just sitting there all blocked from receiving that until something shifts in their life that causes that to open up. But nonetheless, there still can be, we were talking earlier about animals, you know, and how you can plant in animals' minds the seeds of this. Well, you can plant it in the minds of humans too. You know, you can recite mantras to people, especially on their deathbed or any time in their life if they're open to it. But you never know what sort of forces facilitate that process of opening. So every being, at any particular time, yes, they might be closed. They might not be capable of receiving that. But the change will ensue at some point when the factors, you know, evolve, when things kind of move in a different direction. And that's why there's hope for every one of us. Donald Trump will be a Buddha someday, without a doubt. Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche at the Light of the Path retreat last time, at the end of every session he dedicated, you know, may bodhicitta develop in the hearts of all Americans, especially Donald Trump. You know? Because that's the best wish we could have for him. If he could become a bodhisattva, if he could become a being who's dedicated to the welfare of all beings, he'd be magnificent. He'd be in an incredible role. Because he's the most powerful person on the planet to some degree, not to deny, you know, in terms of conventional, you know, reality, he holds an awful lot of power. So if he were to become a bodhisattva, if that compassion he has in his heart that he does have for some beings, if that were to enlarge and embrace welfare of everyone on this planet, it'd be phenomenal. Now again, can we do that? Can a Buddha do that? It depends on Donald Trump's mind and what's going on in his own mind and whatever obscurations that he has to receiving those kinds of teachings. But, you know, that's why we have to stay true to a path that even when we're going to confront the actions of somebody, this is what we're going to talk about a week from Saturday, or 2 weeks from today, yeah. Well, we're going to kind of look at this in a little more detail, but we have to stay true to doing something in response to what's going on, but doing it out of the right motivation, with the right understanding. Otherwise, it's just feeding more delusion, feeding more anger, feeding more confusion in the world. Okay, let's go on to one more slide about this. Instead, you think that these exaggerated qualities come from the object itself, rather than being what you have projected onto the object from your own side. You do not see what has happened. And this is the reality. Unless you're aware of it, you don't recognize it. You've projected all that pleasantness on the object. You've projected all that unpleasantness on the object over here. You're the one projecting that. It's your show. You know, the outside world is all this stuff kind of doing things, and we're not, again, denying that other people are acting from their own states of mind and doing things. How you choose to interpret it, how you choose to work with it, is entirely up to you. What storyline you want to give it. And you go back to Paula's example of her boss. You know, she's had 2 bosses now. With the second boss, she's going, okay, I want to choose the storyline that says this is a person who's actually here to teach me something. And I want to buy into that storyline because it may be more beneficial for me to do that. And for you at your level of, you know, of the path and what you're looking at, that may be the most beneficial thing to do. That's all coming from your side, your own projection of how you want to see that. So what's interesting about this one is that we can talk about mistaken conceptualizations, and then of course we can talk about proper conceptualizations. To see things in the nature of being dukkha. I mean, this is a huge thing that we have to have the right understanding, the right conceptualization of. Because if we understand that that pleasant object that we experience over here is actually in the nature of suffering, then we don't get so caught up in it. We experience it, yeah, it's nice to eat that Thai food or whatever, it's enjoyable, but we don't go grasping and go crazy over it and get all bent out of shape when we don't get it. You know, or when the dish is served cold, or, you know, whatever the case might be. You know, you like have these immediate angry reactions because you're much more flexible and fluid around this because you've come to see that reality. You also, of course, understand the impermanence of things. That things are changing all the time. So this negative experience that you have over here of somebody saying something to you, that's not going to continue forever. Yeah, they've just yelled some things in your ear, but it's a passing, fleeting experience. Why get so caught up in it? Again, different understandings we can bring that will help us to undo this in the same way that we're creating it through our own kind of crazy minds. So a bit more from Lama Yeshe. There's a few more slides. This diluted projection covering the object is much thicker than makeup. Impermanent things are viewed as permanent. What I was just saying. Things that are actually impermanent, we think they're sort of lasting and eternal. Entities that are in the nature of suffering are thought of as the causes of happiness. This stuff over here that we make so concretely into, this is the absolute source of my happiness. If I keep getting those things, as Vesna was saying, you know, if I keep getting all this wonderful stuff, I'm fine. I'm okay. Well, it's actually more and more suffering. It's not really a permanent solution. And although things lack true independent self-existence, they are conceived of as having. Oops, that should be as not having such self-existence. I need to correct that slide. So, although things don't have any self-existence, we think the opposite. As I said, this is a very deeply ingrained thought that we have, this grasping at things as if they inherently existed, as if that pleasantness was from the side of the object, as if even the identity of it was from the side of the object. We are clinging to things in that way, in a very habitual manner. This is the deepest ignorance that we have. So this is also at play. Je Tsongkhapa, who wrote the great treatise that we've been quoting from, defined this process as holding on to something that has nothing to do with reality. It is completely unrelated to the way things actually exist. Okay? So we've created an elaborate fiction that we have bought into in terms of all this stuff. And you have to hear this through the right lens because it's not saying that that isn't sort of your conventional reality. That is happening. But it's still an overlay that we put on top of that that makes it so much more real than it is. As Lama was saying earlier, you know, we come to understand that there's no real I that is needing to be protected, needing to have this particular thing out of our lives, needing to have this thing in our lives. Then we've undermined the whole process because we're not clinging so tightly to things as if there is something concretely, independently, self-sufficiently there. Although things lack that, although we lack that, we conceive the opposite. We think that things are self-existent. So this is, again, a bit trickier to go into. We will do this more tomorrow afternoon when we kind of pick apart dependent arising, dependent relation, come to understand how things originate in dependence upon factors, which means that if they depend on other things, they can't exist sort of intrinsically, independently. We'll go into that, as I said, tomorrow. Now let's look at just one slide for what Geshe Sopa says about this. He doesn't have a lot to say about it here, but we're going to kind of examine this in a little more detail, how he brings these three together in a few slides. So for this third one, he calls it incorrect thinking, or at least this is the translation term that was used. Imputing onto objects qualities that they do not actually have, the afflictions will increase and strengthen to the extent that you indulge in this kind of deluded attention or incorrect thinking. So it's operative at some level, at least at the subtlest level, that we think there's something real there that we have to react to. We think that we are real in the space of that. And we buy into that level of reality, that self-existence. But then we start overlaying a whole lot of other stuff on top of that that causes the afflictions to get even stronger. And the extent to which, for example, we have great attachment to things is the extent to which we have the stronger anger and aversion when we don't have those things. Like I said, these interplay very much, these two delusions. And they're all rooted in ignorance. So with regard to inappropriate attention, incorrect thinking, whatever term we use for this, there are some other thought processes that I think are also worth discussing. So that's why I put in this slide and the next few slides, where we can talk about some other things, ways in which we are thinking about things that aren't really helpful either. They're not technically in the category of this sometimes. Some of them are, but they're just ways of making sure that we understand that we are the creator of so much of our own misery and craziness by the way that we think about things. These other thoughts include, first of all, something I like to point out that Martine Batchelor actually pointed out in her book. It's called Let Go. I kind of called this the joy of letting go on the basis of that. But anyway, she says the first thing is identification with thoughts, with three different levels of perception. And this is an important thing to understand, is that we have a strong way of, when those delusions arise on the basis of that object, that seed, and our mistaken thinking, we kind of do an identification with that thought to a greater and greater degree. She points out that you could say there are three levels of perceptions going on. The first is the mildest, and this is actually a good way to look at it, because it's simply describing the experience. So using the example of fear, we would say something like, the thought process that's good to have is say, there's fear in my mind. Well, what does that do? It distances your identification with the fear. The fear isn't you. The fear isn't, the totality of your being. It is acknowledging that that's an arising in the sky of your mind, like a cloud that has come into your field of perception. You go, oh, there's fear in my mind. It's objectifying that fear, not making it a subjective experience. The second level of perception that starts getting you into deeper trouble is when you start thinking, I am afraid. Because this starts the process of identification with this experience. You start thinking that the afraidness and you are closer together. The two of you are kind of in a more intimate relationship. The identification is stronger. Then with the third one, I'm a fearful person, this makes it into your personhood is flavored with that. This is like when somebody says, I'm an angry person. Well, the correct thought, if, again, maybe correct's a bit strong, but the most beneficial thought is to think there's anger in my mind, because then you see it as something that is passing through and that you can begin to work with from an objective point of view. To think I am angry is the next one. To think I'm an angry person means that you've made it even more solid. It's like how you identify yourself. I mean, I've talked to people who've said, I can't change, I'm an angry person. Well, that means you've solidified your identity with being angry to where there's not much room to move. Does that make some sense? Yes. I know. Everybody can see how this can play out with whatever, fill in the blank here with whatever your own harmful habit is. Just to recognize that these are mental processes that are coming about, that we don't need to go through this identification, especially to this degree, where we think that that's really who we are, kind of innately solidifying our experience. Martine Batchelor, I'll share one couple sentences from her. She says, at different times, we may use these three phrases as ways of describing much the same experience, but each one registers a discrete perception we have of ourselves and makes us feel differently. The more we repeat them, the more we entrench that perception and feeling. You know, the more that we think, I'm an angry person, I'm a fearful person, I'm a jealous person. And jealousy happens a lot, right, in relationships. If somebody says, you know, well, I can't have you talk to that person because I'm just a jealous person. Well, that means that they've identified themselves as that jealousy is always going to be there. It's not something that they can do anything about. Leads to a sort of hopelessness and helplessness. Whereas if we say, oh, there's jealousy in my mind, well, then it means I can work with that jealousy. I can find a way to relieve some of the suffering that that jealousy causes. So that's the first one, this identification. The second is what came up earlier, expectations. I think it was Ralph again who said something about expectations. I like what she says about expectations. There's a double vision. This is from Martine Batchelor as well. She says that there's a double vision of things. What is and what you would like to be or is not there. She uses the example, I won't read it from the book, even though I do have it on my Kindle here, but the example that she had was that when she and her husband, Stephen Batchelor, when they moved to Paris, they had gotten this apartment, and she had this vision. There were 2 levels to the apartment. She had this vision of this winding spiral staircase that would go up to the top floor. And she had it in her head of what it was. And then they contracted with somebody to come in and do this. And it wasn't what she envisioned at all. It wasn't meeting her expectations. And so she said every time she used it to go between the floors, she would have 2 views in her head. What was in front of her that was appearing, that was what it was, but what she thought it should have been. Like this idea that how she envisioned the spiral staircase. And it's maybe again a more worldly example, but this is what we do with a lot of things, right? We overlay an expectation. We think that somehow that's a valid way of looking at things. To think that we are actually going to, benefit from having an expectation. When an expectation is just a thought process that we choose to buy into and engage in. Are some of our expectations met? And again, maybe we would qualify this as unrealistic expectations. I don't think that expectations in totality are a problem. We every day expect the sun to come up. Maybe not. It'll be behind clouds some days, but maybe there's something okay about just ordinary expectations that aren't so invested. But here we're talking about unrealistic expectations. Is it realistic to expect someone else to change? To Lisa's point, we can't change them. You get into a relationship with somebody and you say, well, I'll stay in a relationship with you if you change. Well, that's an expectation from your part that they're going to be able to do that they're going to buy into that. And is that realistic? Well, I don't know. It could be, it may not be. It's very hard to say.
So realistic expectation is okay, is what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I think we have to really be clear about what we mean by a realistic expectation.
Like my boss is going to pay me if I work 40 hours a week.
And I think that may be okay in society to have that expectation for most employers, as long as they're solvent.
That's realistic, and that's just an example that came to mind, but that's realistic. So is that a bad analogy?
Did you say another one? I'm sorry.
No,
that one.
No, that was just that came to mind.
Yeah. Again, I don't think that it should be something that if it doesn't happen, that we're going to create unnecessary pain for ourselves.
Right.
But a lot of things in our lives, there maybe can be some level of expectation around that is not going to be horrible for us to experience the opposite. But there's always the chance of something going the opposite direction. Like I said, we expect the sun's going to come up every day, but one day, there may be something that happens that the planet's gone, or the planet's, I'm not trying to, again, be all doomsday, but we can say that there are certain things that we can have like just an okay expectation about. most of our expectations around people, though, I think are unrealistic.
This is true.
You know? Why do we overlay them? Because it's coming from our own place of wanting things our way, wanting things the way that we... some of you who've raised children in the room, I haven't done this, know how expectations can be problematic around children in particular, right? Because no matter what we expect of them, no matter what overlay we put on them, they're going to be their own person, you know? But does it mean we should have no expectations of them? We shouldn't expect them to clean their room or to, eat their meal when we put it in front of them or whatever. I think those are kind of okay to expect, that at some level people are going to act in some ways. But to expect people to be who we want them to be, to have qualities that they may not necessarily be able to manifest, those are pretty unrealistic. Or to do things that we want them to do, that we really like. Yeah, Lama.
I have a question with this. I was having this discussion about a week ago with this friend of mine. And I was talking about my emotions as far as this situation. And her answer was, well, that's because you have expectations. And I said to her, not good enough. Like for her, so she says, why is it not good enough? I said, well, in society or world society, I said, I really think there has to be a commonality that's agreed upon of a certain type of behavior that, that if somebody gives you a call, or a gift, that you should say thank you, or, common, let's say, decency, like that. And she says, well, you're always going to be let down then. And I said, well, if we want to walk around in philosophy all the time, that's great. I said, in philosophy, my mind works one way. I said, but, when I go to dinner, let's say at a restaurant, a server serves me my plate, I don't throw it up in the air, I go, thank you. Right. And I think that's a normal, conventionally, that
societal expectations.
Yeah, and I don't think there's, and every time I would have something, it would be, well, that's because you're expecting things from people. And I've seen a lot of people use that, or you have as sort of an excuse for maybe not acting with ethics.
Yeah.
It
gets to be tricky because I don't want to make what are realistic expectations versus unrealistic into something that's that set in stone either, because if we look at, for example, what's transpired with this presidency, where we have an expectation prior to this president that people in that position will always tell the truth, right? Or at least hopefully tell the truth, that most of what we get out of their mouth is the truth. I don't know. And so we've been dealing with a change in expectations around that. Is that a realistic expectation to have, that in society people who are in positions of power will be truthful with us?
No.
But nonetheless, we've got somebody who's doing the opposite, so how do we react? How do we work with that? And if it bends us out of shape so much that we can't respond accordingly, then I think we're going to have more pain and suffering by virtue of it. So if the person brings you the meal and it's cold or it's not what you ordered or whatever, are you going to get really angry, or are you going to simply say, well, no, this isn't what I ordered, would you mind, bringing me the other dish or something? So I don't know, I'm not sure when we get into this, what is it really that is the bottom line of what we can realistically expect of others?
I think when I was talking with her, she was sort of saying to me, well, I shouldn't have all these emotions. It was about my family and this, that I shouldn't feel emotional because I have an expectation about my son. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not so sure about that, because it's, meaning that no, am I gonna like go crazy, you know, because somebody didn't do as I want, or like that? No, I mean, that's an unrealistic, I mean, that's an expectation, exaggerated beyond even what probably I could do, putting it on them. But I've listened to the Dalai Lama a lot, you know, I'm talking about this, and it's sort of, I don't know, I mean, there are certain I don't know if as a human being, no, as humans all over the earth, you know, we would hope, but not expect people to be kind, okay? There's a hope that everybody can be kind, and we don't expect that. And the thing is, if I give something to somebody and they don't say thank you, I don't get all upset.
Yeah.
But I think if you don't have any expectations,
I don't know, it gets to be tricky. I agree. I don't know if we're going to resolve any of this in our discussion, simply because, once more, I think that we all have kind of our own things that we might call realistic expectations or unrealistic. But I would say, again, the test of whether it's realistic in the end is, if we don't get that, do we really get bent out of shape by it or not? You know. So I don't know. There's this little phrase. I'm going to share it on the board. Maybe it'll bring even more discussion. It comes, as I understand it, it comes from some of the 12-step programs, but I don't know who actually came up with it. Expectations are premeditated resentments. Again, if we said this is the definition for unrealistic expectations, because that's what we're going to mostly focus on. If you have an unrealistic expectation, it's like a premeditated resentment. Why? Because you're already setting yourself up to have resentment when you don't get what you want. You know? Because you're assuming that is a valid expectation, that person's going to behave in a particular way, or that thing's going to deliver in the way that you thought it was, and what have you. And so you're going to inevitably end up with resentment because you've had an unrealistic expectation of it. I don't know. Expectations are an interesting thing. I think they play a big role in some of our suffering. But it doesn't mean, I agree with you, I don't think it means we can have no expectations. I think it is important that, and maybe we even give those a different name to be for the safe side. We just say that those are the sort of common guidelines about how people should be in this world. And we set it out as that, and there are still going to be rebels and people who don't go along with that and who behave in ways that are contrary to that. And we have systems for dealing with extreme behavior in regard to that, and we have, hopefully don't get too bent out of shape when somebody doesn't say thank you if we've offered them something. We are willing to let that go, and not be so caught up in it. But when it comes to unrealistic expectations, where we're making everything into the way that we envision it to be, that it has to be this way for us to really be happy, or, then I think we're just setting ourselves up for the potential for a lot of resentment because others haven't lived up to what we thought they should be.
Expectations really resonates for me as one of those closed kind of systems that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Very constricted.
Yeah. I think the example that Lama Yeshe uses, which I was kind of alluding to by talking about relationships, is the idea of, like, if you can recall, if you haven't dated for a while, or if you are dating now, what it's like to, you meet somebody and you start getting attracted to the positive qualities of them, and again, your attachment is at play, and it's seeing what is pleasant, and that's how it's painting the person. But your expectations are already playing a role because you think that that's how that being's going to be then. How that person is going to be. They're going to be exactly the way that they're appearing to you in that moment. Because that's all that you're seeing through the lens of attachment, is all the delightful things about them, the way they laugh and the way they do this and that. And then over time, as you get to know them, you start seeing the other side of it that's not in line with your expectation. It's no longer meeting that, because nobody's like this. Nobody's entirely painted that way. We've set up the painting, and we expect them to be that way, and then they show that they've got other aspects to them that aren't in line with that. And we get bent out of shape because they're not doing what we expect them to do. They're not that loving, kind, wonderful person. They've got, a lot of annoying qualities, and they, you know, whatever, you know, fill in the blanks. So I think this is mostly what we're talking about in this category of unrealistic expectations. And we can call the more realistic ones by another name to be safe and just say, yes, I think it is good to have some understanding of kind of how we should all be in the world and the things that are useful to be there for peace, harmony, society. But even those, again, when things go astray on that, in regard to those, we have systems in place to address them. We have ways that we can look at them and try to correct things. So,
two questions.
Sure.
John. You said this previously, but I didn't get the second half of it. You said expectation is just a thought process to something. Expectation is a thought process to act, to motivate, to something.
Sorry, I don't remember the exact word.
Okay. And then what is the opposite of expectation? If I'm not going to have expectations, then what should I be doing? Acceptance?
I think acceptance is part of it. I think, you know, kind of having a mind of somewhat equanimity, of even-mindedness in the face of what we meet. You know, so if you wake up and you expect your day to go really well, then you're going to be setting yourself up, if things don't go well, for disappointment. If you wake up and you say, I'm okay, I'm going to just be with whatever comes up. I'm going to be in a bit of a balanced state.
And that's gotten better for me.
Yeah.
When I paint this rosy picture of how great the day is going to be, then I get better out of shape when it doesn't. So now when I just accept it, and whatever conflicts that come up, I actually am less stressed at the end of the day. I'm like,
Exactly.
okay, this is what happens, and we're just going to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I think, acceptance then? Okay, I'm going to stick with that.
Acceptance, or again, kind of just like an even-mindedness, a sense of like not letting the mind get, you know, just having that willingness to be with whatever is arising. There's an example of the story of the Taoist farmer. I don't know why it's Taoist. I guess it's Taoism embodies a bit of that idea of kind of not being too charged one way or another. And the story is that he has a horse that runs away one day, and the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you, your horse ran away." And he says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" And then the next day the horse comes back with a wild horse that it found out in the wild. So the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, how good for you, you've got 2 horses now. Your horse came back with a wild horse." And he says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" And anyway, the story keeps going with different events that could be interpreted as good or bad. But the Taoist farmer has a willingness just to see them as, it's just an occurrence, it's just happening. And I'm not going to get too invested in thinking, oh, this is great and wonderful, because it could go south the next day. Which it does. You know, his son tries to break the horse and falls off his leg. Or falls off the horse and breaks his leg. And then the son is got a broken leg, so he isn't taken by the military when they come through town. So, you know, it's like all these things that you never know what ensues from the various things that we meet. And so why are we painting them entirely good or entirely bad? That's an expectation that we're setting up for the disappointment when things go the other direction. So if we start our day with kind of like a willingness to say, you know, whatever happens today, may I be able to face it with, you know, some grace, some wisdom, some determination to use it well in the path, be it good or bad. It's a nice way to start your day. You know, much better than, I hope everything goes really, really well today, and I really want it to, because
unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. Okay, so the third type of thought, we've already touched on this a bit, Ralph mentioned storylines. This is, when I say conceptual overlay and storylines, what I mean is like, not just that we are exaggerating the qualities there, but we frequently make up a whole story about what's going on. I'll use Pema Chodron's example because I think it's an excellent one. She said, I think this was at the San Francisco Zen Center where she was meditating one morning, and she'd gone there frequently enough to know that when it was, I guess, in winter, and the radiator system, its old building, it would kick in, and you'd hear all these pings of the radiator. Maybe you guys don't know what radiators are in Florida.
I do.
Many of you I know lived outside of Florida prior. But, you know, there these old systems of like warming buildings, and it would just like, you hear these loud bangs of like metal, and she said that she came out of meditation, you know, because she knew that this is what was going on. But she heard two women talking, after the meditation. The one was saying, "Did you hear that guy banging a hammer throughout, the whole meditation? What were they doing? Doing construction so early in the morning?" And made a whole story about what that noise was. That is totally out of touch with reality. She thought it was human caused rather than just the nature of the radiator system in the building. So it changed the whole thing into a whole negative experience. So it's just one example of how we're not just kind of making it more than it is in terms of its unpleasantness or pleasantness. We're also frequently creating a whole fiction about what's going on. We do this with people all the time, right? I think we do. I'm unique in that way. But they do something or say something, and all of a sudden we're in this mode of thinking, "Oh my God, what do they really mean by that? And what are they saying that's I'm not catching? That's between the lines." And that's we put all this stuff and make up all rather than just simply saying, "Oh, well, I'm not really sure I know what you mean by that. What do you mean by that?" Which is a much more helpful question to get somebody to really explain what they mean by it than to make up a whole fiction about it, that then you change your whole life with them or have all kinds of negative feelings about them on the basis of something that you interpreted, that you put on top of there. So I'm just throwing these out there because I think there are other conceptual processes that we do in addition to that, imbuing things with an unpleasantness from their own side and exaggerating that and what have you. We also go into our own little creative process, which isn't usually that creative, it's more destructive, but it's creative in terms of just, we come up with lots of stuff. So I don't know if there's other things that people find in terms of their own conceptualizations, but anyone have anything that they've noticed that they do as well that you want to share? We see how powerful our thoughts are. That's why, again, the one thing to understand though is that in Buddhism we are never about saying thought is the enemy. It's negative thought is the enemy. Ungrounded thought is the enemy. More constructive, positive thought will help you to overcome all of that. Yeah, Lisa.
So I find myself working, with my monkey mind all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's weird because when I go to sleep,
Oh, it's 4 o'clock. Thank you. That's all right, I understand.
When I go to sleep, I wind up having these fights inside my head. It wakes me up. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding on why during the day I'm able to work with it, but when I dream it comes out.
I don't know if I can answer that question about, there is something about, again, the idea that when we sort of still everything and bring it down to a subtler level, particularly in sleep, that maybe there's some avenues for those things to surface. Whereas when we keep our mind constant with other things that distract us to some degree, but keep us engaged in things that maybe they're just not allowing for that. What might be beneficial, in meditation, again, meditation is something I'm going to touch on as part of the solution to all of this. It's one of the skills we definitely need. But just to understand that in meditation, we're not just trying to focus the mind, do all that type of, like we did with the breath and all that. We're also trying to use our minds as a tool to begin to investigate things. And sometimes it can be helpful to bring that stuff up, even if it comes up in your sleep state and dreaming, whatever, to maybe in the morning in the meditation say, okay, let's take a look at that, deconstruct it and see what it's all about, so that we can actually benefit from that rather than in the space of sleep never being able to really do much to work with it. With our conscious, attentive mind, we can actually investigate and see what's happening. I don't know if that applies with what you're talking about, but I encourage people, even before you go to bed, if you can, it doesn't have to be a formal meditation, but to sit down and those places where you haven't been as skillful through your day, to really recollect them, not for self-flagellation, not to feel horrible about, oh, I was a really awful person today, and then go to bed with that kind of negative thought. No, it's just to say, I got to look at my stuff because I want to make sure that I do better tomorrow. And so then you look at it and you even think about, well, what would have been a more helpful thing to do? How would I have framed it in a way that's better? And then you already set yourself up, hopefully, for the next time you meet it to have different thoughts, to engage in different patterns. and congratulate yourself on the ways that you were doing things better, and the progress that you are making. That's an important part of every day too, to give ourselves the accolades on the work that we are doing. So this kind of brings us to a conclusion for today. I wanted to go into this slide, but we're just going to have to hold that slide. So let's just stop there. This is kind of where we bring all of these first three together. So tomorrow it'll be challenging because we will have the Sunday crowd here that may be just here for Sunday morning, and so I want to make sure I give them something to work with. So what I might do is just start with like a really brief review of the three we've talked about and then continue this discussion around these 6 factors, but try to move it as much as we can. The remaining 3 won't be quite as much to discuss. These 3 are the most important in terms of what feed into our delusion. But to then move it into, how do we actually begin to work with this stuff? How do we do the second difficulty, which is not just identifying and knowing what's coming up and why, but to say, what can I do differently? That's what Pema Chodron calls that second one, do something different. Not just different like on a whim, but different that will, through your informed meditation and learning, actually help you to do a more constructive thing at that time. All right, so let's do a short dedication. And if anyone has any other questions, you're certainly welcome to stay behind for a bit, and I'll be here to answer some questions if you need that. So let's go to page 235 again of the prayer book. There's the 2 verses that we recited at the end of this morning. We'll recite those again. Again, thinking that whatever we've done here, all the thoughts that we've had, all the words we've shared, the words we've heard, everything that we've done throughout this day, particularly this afternoon, we're going to make sure it brings forth the best possible result through this prayer of dedication. And in the second verse, we recall that mind of bodhicitta, this really powerful, positive mind that is kind of the antidotal state, taken to a great degree, where we feel really dedicated to the welfare of others, and we want that mind to grow really strongly in our own hearts and in the hearts of others. So those 2 verses in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then page 244. We'll just do these 2 brief prayers for the good health and long lives of our spiritual teachers, particularly His Holiness and Lama Zopa. And if you have other guides that are involved in your spiritual path, then you can bring them to mind, and we can also bring in mind in general all those beings who are dedicated to alleviating the suffering of others in whatever tradition they are practicing. May we and others always have perfect guides in our lives. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then finally, just send this positive energy out to anyone whose situation moves you at this time. Each of us, no doubt, knows people or beings who are dealing with obstacles in their life right now, or who are ill, who are dying, or who have died. Just feel very generous with sharing all this positive energy with those beings in particular, thinking that through the force of what we've done here today, it alleviates their suffering and helps them to find true peace and happiness. And then hold that final thought, may all beings have peace and happiness through everything we've done here today. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.